IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Ryan, that's Ryan Roberts, y'all. My dude, Ryan Roberts. You can follow him at Rise and Draft. For those not watching, it's Rise N, like Nancy, Draft. Now you can follow him on Twitter and get all his content at A to Z Sports on there. And some of the stuff Ryan will post on Irish Breakdown's premium board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Yet another reason to be on there, Ryan. And my dude, it is kind of wild. I can't believe it's Thursday already. This week has really flown by, and we are 2 days away from yet another Notre Dame game, and that is what we're going to discuss today. Ryan, we're going to talk keys to victory. We're going to talk Notre Dame versus Northern Illinois. I'll be joined by Bill Bender later to preview the 4 big games of the weekend. Ryan, if we finish up here soon, if you want to kind of give some quick thoughts on those 4 games, we can do that as well. But, Ryan, it's another opportunity for Notre Dame to grow, and that is really what this weekend is all about. It's about getting better as a football team as you march on towards what your ultimate journey is.
Yeah, well, and I would say for fans, if you're not enjoying the ride so far after beating a top 25 team on the road in a big-time environment, then go outside and sit in the sun for a little bit and enjoy time because you're a little bit grumpy on nowadays. But, I mean, you're absolutely right, Brian. I literally wrote about it yesterday that I don't want to call it a tune-up game. I don't want to call it like a scrimmage, even though some people are going to quantify it that way. But this is a big test for Notre Dame in the simple fact that one improvement that we liked from Marcus Freeman year 1 to year 2 was that year 2, they buried the teams that they should bury, right? And that was great to see. They did not have the hiccups against the bad football teams. And Northern Illinois is not a bad football team by any stretch, but a team that obviously in a vacuum is not nearly as talented or nearly as good a team as you are. So after a big win, Kyle Field, Saturday night, primetime, college game day, all those things involved, there is a reality where some teams would not be laser focused the next week against a MAC team, where they would be just kind of going through the motions and talking. Everything's cute behind scenes and all that type of stuff. But this is a big test in the simple fact of Marcus Freeman, this staff, these players. Are they all locked in to going in and not messing around with this Northern Illinois team to bury them early and then hopefully get in some of these young sophomores, freshmen, some of these young cats that we want to see so much? I really think that this is going to be about preparation this week, about the process. And if they're true to their process, I think that they shouldn't have too much of a problem on Saturday.
You talk about this Northern Illinois team, Ryan, and it basically comes down to this, right? That people are going to see MAC, and they're just going to say, well, MAC team, and they're not all the same. Number one, MAC, there are varying levels to the MAC. Just looking at Northern Illinois in that league, I think this has a chance to be one of the 2 to 3 best teams in the MAC this year. I really like this Northern Illinois team. They're not as athletic as Toledo was a couple years ago. That Toledo team in 2021 had legit athletes at a couple positions, and quarterback being one of them. Yeah. This is a different type of dangerous MAC team. Dangerous in that they can make this game more competitive than it should be. Not dangerous as in I'm concerned about Notre Dame losing this game. Because they are incredibly experienced and they actually have good skill, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And they're running a system that is new to them, that I'm watching it again last night, Ryan, and I'm like, first play of the game, you line up in a diamond formation essentially, right, with your stud running back in an offset almost like he's a fullback. You run a motion away, you bring him on a sweep, and that's just kind of what they do. And you've got one set of game film on it. I promise you there's some stuff that they didn't show against Western Illinois that they're going to want to show against Notre Dame.
Don't insult the Leathernecks like that. Don't insult the Leathernecks.
But this is a team that is very well coached. I really like the job that Thomas Hammock is doing. And if he can find a way to get even more athletes there to Northern Illinois, they got a shot to be a really good MAC team because they are well coached. But as you said, this is a game that Notre Dame, if they are locked in, if they're the team that they need to be, if they play the way they're capable of, this is not an overly competitive game. If they go back to being the not focused team that they were at times in 2022, then this is a game that may be similar to the UNLV game, maybe even a little bit tighter where, your offense doesn't really wake up till the second half and you don't really pull that game away until late. And then you kind of let them come. It was a sloppy game. You don't want it to be like that. But if Notre Dame comes out and they're focused, this is a game that they should roll. And we're going to find out what that Notre Dame team does this weekend when they do take on Northern Illinois.
And a quick note is that I had spoken to somebody that knows the program very well. Who's Ryan talking about? I'm never going to tell you guys, so stop speculating in the chat. But they had said that they think that Notre Dame might be playing the two best teams in the MAC potentially this year with Northern Illinois and then Miami, Ohio, right? So I think that it's a test, and I think it's a pretty strong test on one side of the ball specifically. But yes, in a vacuum, if Notre Dame plays their game, they are focused. They're ready to roll. Their week has been good. They've been processing everything well. I think that this game should not be overly competitive by midway through the third quarter. I think that's when it should be kind of off the rails a little bit.
I don't know who said that, but I tend to agree with them. I think it's Miami, Northern Illinois, and Toledo. I think are the three best teams in that league, in my opinion. And so we'll see how it plays out. But, again, this is not Central Michigan from last year. This is not Ball State. This is not Bowling Green from 19. This isn't Akron from this isn't Kent
Akron
State.
From now.
Right, exactly. Yeah. This is a team that you've got to be on. You've got to at least bring your B game to win convincingly. If you bring anything less than the B game, then this could be a lot uglier than you need to. I don't know that there's a scenario in which I see Notre Dame losing this game. I don't think that Northern Illinois has the firepower to do that, but it is a game where you could kind of slug your way through it and lose some of that momentum that you had after last week's game. Because that's really a big thing for me, Ryan, as you prep for this is, can you build on the momentum from last week? And can you get that kind of win that you need to get where you did play in the Texas Heat? You did have, you played a lot of dudes. They played about 20 guys on both sides of the ball yesterday, which was nuts. They played 22 guys that have freshman or sophomore eligibility on offense and defense. Mm-hmm. But you still had Howard Cross played 50 snaps. Jack Kaiser played over 60 snaps. You still played a lot of snaps in the Texas Heat. It'd be really nice to come back home for a week and get 30 snaps for Jack Kaiser. 20 snaps for Howard Cross and Riley Mills, and really put this thing away. That would be very important, in my opinion, for Notre Dame.
Well, it would be. I'll just say this, Brian. It's Ohio State's lucky they didn't see Northern Illinois last week. I'm just saying, right? I'm just saying in the chat a little bit there, but I believe that this is the game because you have these games every single year where they are expected to be a lopsided blowout victory, where hopefully you do get to see some of those young guys, right? Like let's get a Bodie Cahoon in the game. Let's get a Cole Mullins in the game. Let's get Carson Hobbs some reps at the nickel or outside corner, wherever the heck you want to end up playing him. Like I want to see some of these young cats play. I want to see Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr at quarterback. I want to see Kedron Young get a couple totes and E.S. Williams be involved. This is a game where if Notre Dame takes care of business, this is where valuable reps are earned for the young players that are going to be a part of the future of your Notre Dame program as well. So I would very much hope that Notre Dame takes care of business this weekend. I sure hope.
You know what I don't want to see? A 21-14 halftime game like it was against Central Michigan last year.
Yeah.
That's what I don't want to see. I want to see this team have a little bit more early game discipline, and that's what we're going to get into when we get into our Keys to Victory, which is coming up next. As always, Ryan, because I love offense and I'm an offensive guy. So we're going to start on the offensive side of the ball today. I know you're a defensive guy, but we'll get to the defense here soon. We're going to talk about the Notre Dame offense and just big picture. It is important that Notre Dame get rolling a little bit on offense this week. And I talked about this in earlier shows, and I want to hear this from you a little bit. I actually think this game is a good test for Notre Dame's offense because you're going to have superior talent. And I know you were in the chat, so you heard the points that I was making, so I don't need to set it too much. But you have superior talent to Northern Illinois' defense, but this is a very veteran defense, with a lot of not just older players, but experienced players, guys that have played a lot of football for Northern. You have a defense that actually has some length to it, which you don't normally see at that level, and they're very well coached. And so you are going to have to earn the success, I would say maybe a little bit more than you did against Central Michigan last year, who you just kind of slopped your way through that one. It wasn't that Central played necessarily great. It's you had a lot of big mistakes. You had a 70-yard touchdown get called back by holding, things like that you've got to eliminate. But I actually think this is going to be a good test for this offense. If they get rolling this week, it's because they played well, not just because they out-talented Northern Illinois.
Right. Well, I would say for this Northern Illinois defense, I think for the offensive line, like a guy like Roy Williams at defensive end who's 6'6", 251 pounds. I think that that's a pretty good test against your young tackles that you still have or inexperienced tackles that you have in Emil Wagner, Anthony Knapp. I don't think that this is just like an off game for them. Like if they don't play well against 97, that kid has enough athleticism and talent to be able to cause some pressure to Riley Leonard. I think more than anything, this is a game, though, that I look at because I listened to your breakdown and I was kind of surprised that Northern Illinois had as good at pass defense numbers because I don't know, man. I watched them and I'm just like, I didn't really see anybody in the secondary that I was blown away by at all.
It's when you go back and watch it last year, Ryan, number one, let's be real. There was not a lot of great passing teams in the MAC last year.
Sure.
Right. That's why there's so many quote unquote great pass defenses in the Big Ten. Right. That's part of it. But you know what I like about their defense, Ryan? They're just sound, right? I mean, they keep everything in front of them. They don't make mistakes. They don't give up the big plays on garbage plays where you turn a guy loose. You've got to earn it because and they're long. And I think that helps them overcome the lack of athleticism that they have in a league where, you know what the MAC used to have, Ryan? The MAC used to have a lot of really athletic wideouts.
Yeah.
And you just don't see as much of that anymore, especially nowadays that when kids do start playing well, they jump to a Power 5 school. I think that helped them in that regard. And there weren't a lot of top-level quarterbacks in the MAC last season. But I just think they play sound football. That's really what it comes down to. They play sound football. They don't have their corners come up. Like I'll be shocked if this is a week where the corners come up and play press man the way that a lot of teams do. If they do, that's going to be like, hallelujah, thank you, Jesus, let's throw the ball down the field. Because to your point, like somebody asked me to compare this team to Marshall. And I said, the big difference is this team is well coached like Marshall. This team has got decent ability in the trenches like Marshall. I think this team has a better running back than Marshall. I like this quarterback. Limited sample size, a little bit of what I saw last year, but especially in this new offense. The big difference is Marshall had legit athletes in their secondary, and I don't think Northern Illinois
and the linebackers too. Linebackers too. I mean, they had the Bo Plan kid and then the Elias Neal kid. Like, I mean, they had some talent on that defense on the second and third levels. I mean, they literally had Stephon Gilmore's little brother, who was a good player for Marshall, and then they had the other corner that was actually better than Stephen Gilmore was, right? So, like, yeah, Marshall's defense was good. I remember talking that week, Brian. I know I predicted Notre Dame to still blow out Marshall, but I remember talking about him that week, and I'm like, guys, like, that defense is pretty good, man. Like, that's a good defense. I kind of feel similar about the Northern Illinois offense when we talk about them, but like the defense for me, I look at it and say, I know I have a very good idea that Notre Dame is going to be able to run the football against them. I would be shocked if they wouldn't be able to run the football at a high clip. I'm sure that Jeremiah Love will break off a couple. I think Jadarian Price has an opportunity to break one or two. I think that Riley Leonard, if used in the run game, which I don't think that he will, and I hope that he isn't, I think that he would tear that team up because I think they're pretty slow on the second level. Like, I did not like the second level of this Northern Illinois defense. I want to see what they can do in the passing game because, again, on paper, it looks like a decent passing game defense, and they have some players that have played a lot of football. But I was talking about this, and like, I really want to see the offense get opened up this week because although it doesn't matter if you're an explosive passing attack against these teams, if you fail to open it up against the bigger schools, it doesn't really matter in a vacuum. But in order for them to start to open things up and gain trust that they can open it up against better competition, you need it to start somewhere, right? Like, I need to see if Chris Mitchell can create a big play. I need to see if Jaden Greathouse can, bang eights for a big game kind of down the seam. I need to see if Eli Raridan can take the seam a little bit. I need to see if some of these other wide receivers, if Bo Collins can consistently be a vertical threat for them in some capacity. Like, I really hope that Notre Dame comes out and tries to create some explosive plays in this passing game because that's what I most want to see, to be honest with you. I think that Notre Dame could just sit there and they could run like they did last week as far as like their game plan and being a little bit conservative in the passing game and just running the football. And they could probably win by 20 plus points doing that. But I really want to see if they can open things up because I think that is the spot of this offense that I think has a lot of potential, but I still think is a very big unknown because we just saw them throw for under 160 yards last week. Let's see if they can open things up a little bit.
With that in mind, Ryan, let's dive into our keys to the game. And that's a lot of it's going to be centered around that. And so for me, it starts where I always start with keys to victory, Ryan. And it's because I'll continue to say it. I will stop having this as my number one key to success when Notre Dame proves to me that they can actually do this with some level of consistency, and that is start fast. They've got to come out and get off to a fast start, Ryan, because it's going to be harder to put this Northern Illinois team away if you slug your way through the first half, because they will try to run the football and control the clock and play field position, and they have very good special teams at Northern Illinois. And so I want to see this team come out and have a fast start, and not only practically speaking, but I think they need it, Ryan. I think the offense started to kind of feel its way a little bit in the fourth quarter of that game last week. You had the big play to Jaden Greathouse. You had the big throw to Bo Collins. You had the corner route on the snag concept to Cooper Flanagan for the 16-yard gain, which kind of sparked another drive. You started to see a little bit of it kind of coming alive in the fourth quarter of that game, late third quarter. They need to build on that and really come out and start fast in this game. Look, I understand why they were a little sloppy last week. You and I think you predicted them to have 20. We both, I think, had
28.
24 points. You had 28. I had 24.
28. Yep.
Right. So kind of in the wheelhouse. You had them scoring 4 times. I had them scoring 4 times. Right. Mm-hmm. They ended up scoring 5 times. Am I correct? Right. 2 touchdowns and 3 field goals. Right.
Yep.
Correct. Right.
Yes.
So it kind of went how we thought, because A&M has a really good defense, and B, the reality is, Ryan, as I pointed out in the show, they started 9 players on offense with freshman or sophomore eligibility. They started in this game with Mitchell Evans not playing. They started 2 players on offense that started – 4 players on offense that started at the end of last season. That's it. Right. Now, there was other guys that played. Jaden Thomas obviously played, and Cooper Flanagan played last year, and Eli Raridan played last year. But as far as the starting lineup, you had a very young lineup. Your 2 quote-unquote veterans in the starting lineup are brand new to your system. Neither really did much in the spring. Bo did nothing in the spring. Riley did very little in the spring. So, yeah, you play that kind of defense, you're going to go off to a slow start. That's fine. I can excuse away the slow start against A&M. And not even excuse it away. It's understandable. That I'm not going to have as easy of a time explaining it away if you can't start better against Northern Illinois. You do need to get Riley going a little bit. You do need to build some confidence. You do need to be willing to push the tempo a little bit. I understood playing a little bit slower last week, but this is the week you need to start becoming who you want to be moving forward, because the key in week 1, Ryan, we've talked about it how many times. I don't care how you do it. Just get a win, and then you've got these get-right games coming up. Well, this is a get-right game for the Notre Dame offense, and I think coming out fast is going to be huge for them to not only practically put Northern Illinois away early, but also to give this team some much-needed confidence. And I'll feel good about this offense if they do come out and start fast, because, as we said, this is a quality, veteran Northern Illinois defense.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, an offense is – if you are a run-centric or pass-centric offense, I really don't care as long as the other side is efficient and create plays when you need it to. That's been the problem with Notre Dame in several years, is that when they've had a great run game, their pass game isn't efficient, and they don't have the ability to create big plays in that regard. Notre Dame, I think, more than anything, needs to come out and they need to create efficient and explosive plays in this game. I mean, that's what I'm going to judge this game off of, because, again, if they ran the ball 60 times in this game and chose not to throw once, they probably still win. And they probably still win by a decent margin, because they are incredibly talented at running back and they have a dynamic athlete at quarterback. There's no doubt. I think Riley Leonard talked about this in his post game, where he had said, they asked about the Bo Collins play. And he had said that, he said something to the vein of, I needed to throw to him earlier in the game, but I didn't, right? And why didn't you? Because you didn't have trust at that point, right? Now you saw that Bo can make that play. So the next time, it's easier for you to trust that he's going to make that play. I think players showing that they can make those plays makes others comfortable around you. And that starts by having a strong start to the game. If Riley throws a ball up to Bo Collins on a back shoulder in early portion of this game for 20-something yards, and he makes the reception, we're rolling, boys. If the first handoff to Jeremiah Love goes for 15-plus yards and shows a little bit of explosiveness, you're rolling. If you give a short crosser to a Chris Mitchell or an outside vertical to Chris Mitchell and he creates a big play, you're rolling. This trust starts to build. And when this team trusts itself offensively, I think it's going to be dangerous. But that is only going to happen if they have success. Once you taste success, that breeds more success. I need Notre Dame to show that they can do that this week.
And they've got to be put in position to, you can't complete balls down the field. You can't complete the deep overs. You can't complete post routes and wheel routes and go routes if you don't call them. That's going to be the other thing. Now, again, this isn't a criticism. I understand why they did it. I get it. But you need to see it now. The things that we saw in fall camp, the things we saw in the spring, it's now time to see them in games because, you're going to need to start building that momentum. So that's obviously number one is starting fast. Number two, and this is kind of what we talked about before we got into specific keys, but it is a very important thing, is Notre Dame does need to get the pass game going early. Two reasons why. Number one, big picture, because as we said, like a lot of keys to victory in this game are not necessarily if you don't do this, you can't beat Northern Illinois. It's more about, yes, this is going to help you beat them, but this is also about building your team for future success when you do play tougher teams like Purdue next week. Purdue's not necessarily as sound as this Northern Illinois team, but they're a lot more talented than this Northern Illinois team at certain spots. And then, of course, in 3 weeks when Louisville comes to town, that's going to be a big time test, and you need to get your offense going. So the pass game's got to get going early. What does that mean? You've got to have some efficiency early, right? You've got to get those balls out, throw the ball on time. Riley's got to go through his progressions well. Did you see the play, the ball he threw to on the in cut to Chris Mitchell that he drove into the ground? Did you see the burst corner that Bo Collins had backside? No. So they ran a concept, and it was a 3x2 to the right and it was two guys to the left. And Mitchell ran an in cut. They basically ran a burst corner smash concept backside. So number one runs the burst corner, number two runs the slide. It was a 2-over-2 backside. To me, that's where the read's got to go. And Riley looked there for like a split second and then immediately went away from it. Bo has a one-on-one, so I liked that anyway because he got up on the corner. And then he stuck his corner out. As soon as he stuck that inside foot, the corner falls down and Bo's wide open. It would have been a touchdown. Like, I need to see Riley be more patient with the reads. And that comes down to partly trust. Hey, Bo's got a one-on-one. I'm going to stick with this for a second and get the ball out. That's part of that timing thing, that trust thing that they need to have. So efficiency early, getting the ball out. Let Riley get into a nice early rhythm, that being willing to take some shots down the field. The receivers got to make more plays. But at the end of the day, this is going to come down to the quarterback has got to get more comfortable with the system and comfortable with the players around him. That's going to be a huge part of this because there was stuff there against Texas A&M. One of the field goal drives, he's got Jeremiah Love on a one-on-one. You need to have a better ball. Jeremiah needs to run a little bit more to the corner, but that was not a good football. Make a couple of those throws, and all of a sudden this offense goes off just based on what they did last week. Forget what they're going to do matched up against Northern Illinois. There was stuff there last week. You've got to hit some of those early, Ryan, because if the pass game gets rolling early, Northern Illinois has no chance to stay in this football game because now they don't need to run 60 times to get to 250 yards. They may only need to do it 35 times because if they're forced to spread that defense out and now you're gashing them up the middle with your running backs and running some of your stuff with your running backs and they have to vacate the box a little bit because that's what happened to A&M last week. Right now, the difference is with last week, Ryan, Mike Denbrock had to force the vacate with the formations. This week, hopefully, you can do it with your normal stuff because you're having success in the perimeter. But obviously, getting that pass game going early is a huge part of what this offense needs to do in this game.
I just think you need to be more well-balanced leaving this football game, right? And obviously the balance comes from you just ran for almost 200 yards against a good Texas A&M defense. Now it's about, like, let's get the passing game up to par. And because I truly believe this, and maybe some people disagree with this because I know I still find it hilarious that there's like a, play Steve Angeli over Riley Leonard stuff in chats sometimes. It's pretty hilarious. But
I got to think those people aren't serious. Like I have to tell myself that so I can feel better about humanity. That's what I have to do, Ryan.
I unfortunately, I think that you're probably incorrect with that assumption. I believe, unfortunately.
let me live in my world over here of naivete that tells me that people can't be that just off.
I think they are, unfortunately, but I do believe that Notre Dame to hopefully go undefeated or not very close or make a deep playoff run, which I think they're very capable of. They are only going to go as far as Riley Leonard can take them. I mean, he is get out of jail free card as an athlete. Everyone saw it against Texas A&M, right? He's one of those guys, and people heard me talk about this in nauseum over the last couple of years. You need players that can make right out of wrong sometimes. And there were some plays that had no business being a big play or being a sound play, and Riley Leonard's athleticism was able to save you last week. Now we need to see that happen in the passing game because Riley has all the talents to be a very good passer on this level. You saw flashes of it. It's there. I mean, at Duke, it was there a lot. At Notre Dame week 1, you saw the flashes, but it was inconsistent. Now, I expected some inconsistency early, right? Like I did. I mean, you have a brand new wide receiver room, kind of. I mean, at least from some of your depth, especially. But Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, Jaden Harrison, who played a little bit in the first half. Like you have a new group, and then you have a new quarterback, and you have a new offensive coordinator. Like there was always going to be some things that had to be ironed out that wasn't going to be super sharp. Now this week, you need to start to figure that stuff out. He talked about his confidence in Bo Collins at the end there, right? Like he knew he could throw it up and he would make a play. Well, I need to see that translate to the next week now, right? And then Jaden Greathouse has a big catch on that game-winning drive. Need to see him start to get going a little bit. Chris Mitchell he only had a couple opportunities in that football game in general and only one catch for 10 yards. So getting those guys involved and making this a more well-balanced attack is the key for this game. That's the stepping stone that you need to have because, again, getting Riley Leonard comfortable, getting this passing game comfortable, because the run game is going to be great, I think. I think that has potential to be a big-time running game, but we have seen in the big game, we have seen in some games the last couple of years, because Notre Dame's had a pretty good run game in recent years, is that there's going to be a game where it's not working, guys. It's just not working. It just isn't. Louisville last year was that to a degree. I know they went away from it for Clemson, but like either way, there's going to be a game where you're just not efficiently running the football because they're stacking the box. Need the passing game to get open, get going here. You need Riley Leonard to take a step forward. You need these weapons to make plays for him when the ball is in the spot.
Running game put up 198 yards last week against Texas A&M. Did not have that in my prediction sheet, and it feasted on big runs. Ryan, I had Notre Dame in my breakdown. I actually added the play where there was the hold on Ashton Craig. And I had them at 207 yards, 204 yards in the game, just pure runs, not scrambles, just pure runs at 7 yards of play. And so the raw numbers were excellent. However, my efficiency number was 37%. 60 is a good game. They were at 37%. That's really where number 3 is for me, is I want to see more consistency in the run game. Now, part of that was your young offensive line, but let's be real. Part of that was also Texas A&M has a really good front, and they played well. And I thought Notre Dame had to earn all their yards. But I do want to see more efficiency because if this offense can combine efficiency and explosiveness in both the run and pass game, then they're going to be a really, really dangerous offense. So just want to see some of the mistakes that they had last week get corrected early. I want to see some of the minuses negated, the run-throughs negated, where you've got a guy crashing off the edge and tackling your running back as soon as he gets the ball. I want to see those things negated. But you know what I will say, Ryan? I didn't talk about this in my breakdown, but I want to give some props to Joe Rudolph for this because early in the game, one of the reasons they were having in the run game is they were doing a very poor job with their angles on down blocks. And they were taking a really level angle, which was letting the A&M guys really easily destruct and get over top and blow the play up. Late in the game, they did a much better job of working towards that upfield shoulder, and they were then allowed to kind of keep those holes open. So good job making those in-game adjustments. That was one of the best in-game adjustment situations that Notre Dame's had on offense in a long time against a quality opponent. But I want to see that also now carry into this week where you do have a little bit more efficiency. Turn -2s into +4s, turn some of those +3s into +8s. I want to see a little bit more of that. You and I know they can hit home runs, Ryan. And we didn't even see Riley hit a home run last week. He will, right? Yeah. Maybe this week. Who knows? But he will. He's done it before. We know they can be home run hitters. Now let's see that they can do the little things. And it's not so much the backs that I'm worried about. It's the line giving them the opportunities to maximize some of those carries.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a marriage a little bit because, like, the offensive line, just naturally, when you're talking about a team that only had 6 career starts in a 5-man unit, there's going to be some just natural communication errors. There's going to be, they're not cohesively moving together. There's just
Right.
kind of a
Get off a
questioning
double
of one
team too
another.
early. Right.
I will say, to be fair to them, though, that I do think there were a couple misreads by Love and Price. Like, I don't think that they made
First
it
inside
easy.
zone to Love.
Yeah.
If he cuts that back, they had a really good hard press to the front side. If he cuts that back, he might have housed it.
Even there was one QB power, I think, or maybe it was just a sweep. I can't remember what it was, but there was a play where Riley Leonard was out in space, and I think Riley was just kind of working to the sideline a little bit too fast. And if he just kind of stays patient, I think he cuts off a Billy Stroud's butt, and he might have another 5-10 yards potentially. Like, it's that type of play. So I think that all around, we're just talking about one, more cohesiveness up front. You're talking about offensive running backs and quarterbacks involved in the run game, being a little bit more patient and trusting the guys that are in front of you. And then that naturally will just kind of take over, because I don't think we saw all the run looks that we're going to see at Notre Dame either. Like, I guarantee we're going to see some jet stuff at times. I guarantee we're going to see some outside zone at times, not like just the pulling stuff that we saw, like the pin and pull stuff. So I think that we saw a taste of it, but it can definitely get better. There's no doubt. It was very feast or famine is kind of how I would kind of quantify it last year. You weren't efficient in the short areas of the running game, but you were able to break some home runs that kind of balloon the stats a little bit. And naturally, I think with who Love and Price are, I do think that that's going to be a little bit of what you are, but it could definitely be more efficient. There's no doubt. But you are going to be a little bit more feast and famine compared to Estime, because Estime was a bulldozer. He's just a little bit more of an efficient runner.
Right. Also, I want to see more success on first down running the football, Ryan. Their first down efficiency numbers were also not good. Now, they had some big runs on first and second down, but I just need to see a little bit more efficiency on that. That's going to do it for the offensive side. We're going to get over to the defensive side next, folks. But before we do, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Make sure you guys have liked this show. Make sure you're subscribed, and make sure that you have the notification bells on, because when we go live, they're going to let you know about it. And you can always check out what we're doing here at irishbreakdown.com. So, Ryan, let's dive into the defense, and we'll spend a little bit of time on this one. The reality is this is an interesting matchup, because this side of the ball is a little bit different than the other side of the ball, because I think this is a strength for Notre Dame. Obviously, Notre Dame is an elite defense, in my opinion. But what we are going to see this week, like that we're not going to see on the Northern Illinois defenses, there's a couple potential pros, at least one for sure on this defense, and a really dynamic. I said the MAC used to have a lot of these really short, athletic, dynamic players, and they don't have as many anymore. Well, one of them in the MAC is on this roster, and that's Trayvon Rudolph. But Ontario Brown is a very dynamic player. I really like what they did in the opener from just a scheme and play calling standpoint. Now, some of that stuff worked because Western Illinois is not very good. I mean, let's be honest about that. But some of it was like, boy, that's really good scheme. That's really good stuff. He's not just relying on my guys to be better than the dudes across from me. It's let's create some opportunities. So this is going to be a good test for Notre Dame in the areas that I think are important for this defense to continue to mature, because the exciting thing for me, Ryan, and I'm throwing this to you because I want to get your opinion on this. I broke down the game and I came out of that defensive performance saying, dude, they did not play anywhere close to their best football against Texas A&M. Now, they were dynamic because they're just really talented and guys stepped up and make big plays, but there's a lot to clean up when you look at and not even like, well, yeah, A&M did this. It's just mistakes by Notre Dame where they didn't make a mistake or they didn't execute. There's a lot to clean up, and I think this Northern Illinois team, the way that they run their system, is going to force Notre Dame to have to show improvement in those areas if they're going to shut down Northern Illinois the way that they should.
Well, I think they're going to need it, because honestly, like, I came out of the first game, and the caveat again is they're playing Western Illinois, and all due respect to the Leathernecks, like, they're not a very good FCS team, right? So like, it's not the easiest data point to just look at and know and think that that's what Northern Illinois is, compared to them just playing a bad team, a bad opponent. But I will say this about them is that when you isolate them offensively, I think they have a couple NFLers just from the skill position perspective. Like, I think Ontario Brown actually had 6th round grades from the NFL, like midday 3 grades type of stuff from the NFL in this preseason. So I think that kid's going to get drafted, the running back. He's a little under 5'10". He's 5'9" and 6/8, so 5'9" and 3/4 and 221 pounds. Physical, pretty explosive short areas. Like, he doesn't have a top gear, but like he gets to his top gear very fast though. And he even caught a pass last week where I mean, it was a check down, but like he went for like 40 yards on the play. Right. So like, I think that he has really good feel for space. He worries me a ton if I'm Notre Dame. If you're not gap sound against that kid, or you're just kind of being a little bit passive at the point of attack and you just allow a little bit of a crease, Antonio Brown could hurt you a little bit. And same thing with that, like the Trayvon Rudolph kid had a jet sweep for a touchdown in that game. He had 4 catches for 104 yards and a touchdown in that game. He creates some big plays. And then the guy that's like the biggest mismatch potential for them just in a vacuum, I think, is the Grayson Barnes kid, who's like the tight end slot, who is 6'5", 225. I mean, like, he's a difficult player to match up to if you're a smaller defensive back because of his length. And he's also difficult because he's pretty good in a straight line. I mean, he had 5 catches for 95 yards. It's 19 yards a clip last week.
And he averaged over 20. He averaged about 20 last year, Ryan. I mean, so it wasn't like he had here's the thing, like, and this is the point that Ryan's making. It's like you watch some of these games against FCS teams, you're like, oh, Iowa scored 40 points. I'll have a lot to say about those 40 points when we get to it later in the show. But, you know, I mean, you needed 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to get to that point in time. You've got to be careful when you play these. And as Ryan said, this is a bad FCS team. Yes. I believe Indiana State's only win last year was over Western Illinois, who went 0-11 last year. I mean, they're not good. So you sometimes have to be very leery of looking at that. But then you look at what Grayson Barnes did last year. He had 23 catches for 422 yards and led their team with 5 touchdowns, 18.4 per catch for a tight end. Yep. That's pretty good. So this is not oh, well, yeah, he did well against a team that's really not good. No, he kind of did this a lot last year. And, you know, in the bowl game, had 5 catches for 105 yards. You know, went 2 for 66 in a win over Ohio, went 3 for 44 in a win over Eastern Michigan. He only had 1 catch against Toledo, but it went for 28 yards. So this is a kid 2 for 31 against BC in an upset win over BC last year. This kid's a legitimate, you know, good football player that you have to account for. And so when you can have that many different types of weapons, Ryan, it does make your offense. I mean, their quarterback is not a super talented kid, but he made great reads and got the ball accurately where it needed to go last week. Yeah. And that's the key.
He did everything he was supposed to last week, and I think they moved the pocket a little bit for him. I don't think he's a bad athlete. I just think he's like a functional pocket passer, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so he can move a little bit. But the ball's accurate and it's on time usually. Yep. And ultimately, he knows that he has guys around him. Like, again, I'm telling you guys, if they run a jet sweep to Trayvon Rudolph and whoever your rover is or your nickel is doesn't have a good run fit, like, that kid could break it for 20 plus yards. I mean, like, he has that type of juice to him. Grayson Barnes could out leverage a defensive back down the field for a 20-something yard catch. Yep. That could happen. Antonio Brown can make a 5-yard run into a 10, 15-yard run if tackling isn't good.
Or a -2 into a +5. Yeah. Right. Like, in keeping drives going. So let's actually get right into the keys to victory, Ryan, right there, because that's a big part of it. Number one is be disciplined. And not only because Northern presents 2 unique challenges to you. Number one is they have guys that can make you miss or beat you down the field, right? Just by their skill set. Number 2, this is a offensive system that does a lot pre-snap. I mean, they were lining up in 14 personnel on 1st and 10 and doing like motions and shifts and stuff out of it last week. And then the next snap, they're in 12 personnel and they're doing, you know, creating like these huge spaces on one side and then running away from it on a jet sweep. I mean, a lot of bootlegs. Like you said, they did a great job of moving the pocket last week. They do a really good job of some of their levels concepts. They do a lot of post-snap switch type stuff, a lot of jet sweeps. They also lined up last week and brought in, is that Jordan Lynch's little brother? Is that who that is? The Justin Lynch kid, number 2?
I'm not sure if they're related or not.
It is. He looks like him, but they brought him in and they did some wildcat running back stuff where they literally took the quarterback off the field. So it wasn't like they just wasted the quarterback over on the sideline. They just said, hey, this is what we're going to do. Now, yeah, it was great that it worked against Western Illinois last week, and I don't expect that particular thing to work against Notre Dame. But the point is, Ryan, you got to prepare for a lot. And it requires you to be very disciplined pre-snap and post-snap. And if you are, you'll shut them down. But if not, they'll get you some gash plays and make this thing more competitive early on than it should be.
Well, they try to, as a defense, they're trying to make you guess wrong ultimately, right? Because you mentioned like the level stuff. I mean, you also mentioned that they did the thing where They have Antonio Brown next to the quarterback, but they have a running back behind the quarterback as well. So they're running some 2 running back stuff. But off of that, they'll run some play action where they send Antonio Brown to like the flat, but then they'll run like a deep over and they'll have the guy on the front side run just like a deep route where you're creating levels. Like you're trying to make a flat defender or a cover 2 defender make a decision on if he's going to jump or if he's going to stay back. And ultimately, I mean, they made a lot of plays off of that.
Yeah.
So the offensive coordinator is super creative, man.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about him. I even forget his name because I think it was a little bit hard to pronounce.
I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. Right.
But I did look him up because I'm like, because I honestly, I did that with what game was I watching? There was a game. Forget what was it? I can't remember. I'll remember it later. But there was a game I was watching where I literally wrote down the offensive coordinator's name because I'm just like, that's super interesting. Like I think that might be somebody to keep a close eye on long term because they do some super intriguing things. Kind of just on the Georgia Tech's offensive coordinator. I can't remember his name, but like that dude, super interesting offensively what they're doing. Northern Illinois has some of that as well. I don't think it's quite to that degree, but like I was watching their offense and I'm like, that's unique. Like Al Golden is going to have his team very studious this week because they're going to see some formations. They're going to see some concepts that they did not see last week. Like this is a very unique, different offense. Like you've seen levels, but have you seen levels out of the formations that they ran last week? Not as much. Like it was very unique in that way. So I think that the preparation is going to have to be big for this team because they present a lot of challenges because it's just going to take one player doing a little too much or one player in the wrong spot for Trayvon Rudolph or Antonio Brown or somebody else to create a big play. Like they have that type of upside with Hampton at quarterback.
What's interesting is he was actually a head coach in that really good Wisconsin league before he came to there. And the interesting thing is they weren't very good and they didn't score a lot of points. And which I thought was really interesting because I was like, man, I expect them to be a lot better, but he does some really interesting things for them, no question. And he's got some good athletes to work with. I mean, they do have a Justin Lynch type athlete for, again, when we're praising this, it's not so much that it's going to necessarily work Saturday, but that's going to be really hard for MAC defenses to shut down with all that stuff they got going on. And as long as Notre Dame is disciplined, they should be effective. And part of discipline, key number 2, Ryan, is kind of part of discipline, but obviously the penalties got to get cleaned up. That's a given. We'll need to spend time on that, but they got to tackle better.
Yep.
And in today's football, the reality is most teams aren't going to tackle super great in openers just because the way that you just can't tackle like you used to. You got to get better and better progressively as the week goes on. You have to tackle better in this game, A, because you as a team as a whole, you just got to tackle better. Number 2, if you don't tackle some of these athletes and you let them get in space, I'm just going to say it. A&M had much bigger athletes last week. These are a lot quicker athletes that concern me much more with the ball in their hands than the kids at A&M had. I'm not saying that they're better football players. They're just different. And for a team that did struggle to tackle last week, that's the kind of thing that can maybe result in a score or two that you otherwise wouldn't have given up. So being really sound tacklers is going to be very important this week in this matchup. And then, of course, building in the future games.
Yeah, I would say with Texas A&M, just like a quick note is that like until they start getting Cyrus Allen more involved and they start getting Terry Bussey some reps, like they're just not going to be a dynamic offense. They're just not. I mean, they have big body pass catchers. They don't have dynamic ability. And while it might be different, Northern Illinois does have some dynamic athletes. Like they have some guys that if you give them space, they can create a play and they can do those types of things. And in today's game, man, it is just so important to tackle in space because why do we praise these offensive coordinators? It's because they understand how to create space. They understand how to manufacture space. At the end of the day, an offensive coordinator's responsibility is to put a player in a best possible scenario to be successful. And in today's game, that's about space, whether that is screen game, whether that is diverse run game, whether that is different concepts that you run in the passing game. You're trying to create space. And if they create space for Trayvon Rudolph and Antonio Brown and a couple of these guys, they have a chance to make some big plays. So Notre Dame needs to be both in the right spot, but also don't let any, like, no missed tackles in space, man. Like, don't tackle Trayvon Rudolph for a 3-yard gain on a jet sweep instead of letting him burst for 15 plus. Like, just don't let that stuff happen. That hidden yardage, that can come back to bite you in a bigger football game. This one, it probably wouldn't be the end of the world, but you still want to see a team improve in that aspect because down the road, when you're talking about them playing against Eric Singleton and the running back from Georgia
Jamal
Tech,
Haynes,
Jamal Haynes, number 11, and some of those types of guys in those games, even Virginia, when you have to go against like Chris Tyree and like that type of stuff, you want to make sure that you are not allowing second effort running. You're not allowing second effort yardage. You're not allowing explosive plays. And that's, I think it's a good test in that regard, because Trayvon Rudolph, honestly, I'm surprised he's playing for Northern Illinois right now.
I'm surprised him and the running back are still at Northern Illinois, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's shocked that the Ontario Brown is like, why wouldn't I don't even know an example of a team, but like, why wouldn't a low MP5 school be like, hey,
pick a Big Ten team outside the top 5, and why is he not there? You know,
exactly.
You know what I mean?
Like, so Illinois, why is he
right.
not in
Best running back in the state of Illinois is this kid, in my opinion.
Yeah, it might be right now for sure.
In college, anyway.
Yeah,
Brian, last key. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I thought you were
done. No. I just say you need to limit the plays in space and not allow them to create a bunch of explosives.
Last key for me, Ryan, is I want to see more disruption from Notre Dame this week from their front. That includes being more disruptive against the run. That includes, I thought the timing of the pressures last week were a little telegraphed, a little late on some of them. When they were timed well, right through the hole and getting pressure on them. So not a surprise for week 1. We saw that last year too, Ryan, with the defense, where the blitz packages kind of got progressively better as the season went on and they had more experience in it. And that was with veteran players. So I would like to see that be a little bit more effective. I think it's especially important in this game on early downs. If you can put this offense in a lot of, just like last week, when you can put this offense in a lot of higher passing scenarios, they're just going to be less effective, because some of the trickeration and the different things moving the pocket just won't be as effective if they're in some long down and distance situations. So if you can have some, more negatives this game, more tackles for loss, bring the quarterback down, more hits on the quarterback, you're going to be a lot more. This is a kid that completed 90% of his passes last week. I don't care who you're playing, Ryan. I mean, Riley Leonard didn't complete 90% of his passes in pregame.
I think one of his passes was dropped last week too, so he might have completed 95%. So yeah, it's pretty.
There you go.
Pretty insane, man. I would say this too is that, and this is more specific to like pass rush, being able to get to Hampton as a quarterback, is that one thing that I did want to see more of last week from Notre Dame that I don't think we did is the pressures that they got was based upon a lot of like movement up front and some blitz package stuff. I would like to see more true wins in the passing game, right? Like I want to see Jordan Mattello just win outside track. I want to see Boubacar Traore slip a block and cross face. Like I would like to see a couple of these guys.
We'll see Riley Mills have more wins in the pass game against guards as well.
Yeah. Yes. Don't get me started on Riley Mills, but that's another conversation for another day. But yes, I want to see more high quality wins, because every year we talk about like these players that like put up these sack numbers, right? But then you go back and you're like, a lot of them were like coverage sacks and like not high quality wins. And like that doesn't translate to the big games. Like in the big games, if Notre Dame plays an Ohio State or an Oregon or whatever, a good team in the playoffs, if they get there, even USC at the end of the year, I guess, is a good example. I want to see Notre Dame have guys that can just win. Like I don't have to have a guy, do a twist, a stunt. Like you want to do that on top of the complement of, I can just send 4 and they could get home.
Because that stuff is more effective when you can have those wins, Ryan. I mean, when you're worried about that, that's when those things become even more effective. So I want to certainly see that. That's our final key for the defense. So that's going to do it for the defensive breakdown. We're going to get the predictions next, folks. But before we do, don't forget to hit that like, hit that subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And as always, if you haven't done so, make sure you're signed up at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So final section of today's show, Ryan, is we're going to dive into our predictions. But first, I just want to kind of revisit last week. You went 28-17.
Yes.
Correct. I went 24-16. I went away from what I originally texted you, which was 24-13. I'm still kicking myself for doing that. But I think the game played out pretty much how we expected it to and I told you this before, and the only thing that was different is I thought Notre Dame would pull away late. I just thought it would be earlier than what it was. I thought it'd be more maybe late third, early fourth, as opposed to the last 6 minutes where you needed a defensive stop where A&M could have taken the lead to do it. So I'm not surprised at the outcome. Obviously, you predicted an 11-point win. They won by 10. I just thought Notre Dame would maybe put them away just a little bit sooner, but for the most part, the game went exactly how we kind of thought it would go. It was two great defensive football teams, two there's, I would argue, 3 great defensive minds involved in it with Elko, Freeman, and of course Al Golden. But overall, I thought the game played out how we thought it would for the Irish.
Yeah, I think on the prediction show last week, I had said that I thought it was going to be a dogfight for 3 quarters, and then Notre Dame was going to have a drive in the fourth that was going to be the separator. They're going to end up winning by, I had 11 points, and then I obviously ended up being 10. So the score was a little off, obviously 28-17 compared to 23-13. But regardless, like I did see it being a very competitive game throughout the majority of the game, and then Notre Dame's offense was finally able to break through in the fourth quarter, and they broke through. So ultimately the storyline was similar, just the score was a little bit off.
So Ryan, without further ado, it's
Yep.
time for us to make our previews and predictions for this upcoming game against Northern Illinois. So first of all, tell me what your score is, and then tell me how you see the game playing out.
I ended up picking Notre Dame 44-17 is my final score prediction. I think that when I look at this game, I actually think that Notre Dame fans probably, and I don't know if I'm going to be on the message board to see kind of the hysteria that's on there if Northern Illinois scores an early touchdown or 2, right? But I do think that this
If they
is a
get a
game
first down, Ryan,
Yeah.
people
Oh,
are
they're
going to
gonna lose
lose
their
their
minds.
minds based on how the chat went last week.
I'm telling you, man, this offense is a good unit for Northern Illinois and has some playmakers on it. So I actually believe that it's going to be kind of a close-ish game in probably the early second quarter. Like I could see this game even going to like 21-10 at halftime, 24-10 at halftime, where you're just kind of like, seriously, man, like let's get going here. And then Notre Dame ultimately does get going in the second half, and the defense kind of stifles a little bit. So I think there's going to be an early score or 2. I think Northern Illinois is going to be one of those just annoying teams in the first half. And then ultimately, Notre Dame is going to make a bunch of explosives throughout the game. And I think the depth, more than anything, is really going to just be the difference in the end. So 44-17, I think it ends up being a quality victory for Notre Dame. I think you see some of the elements that you want to see as far as some explosives in the passing game and the defense clamping down in the second half. But I do think that this is a Northern Illinois team that can score a little bit early in the game. That's going to just be a little bit frustrating for some fans.
I've got 41-13, Ryan. So we have a very similar margin of victory. I see Notre Dame getting basically one fewer field goal than you, and I would not be shocked if one of the final scores for Northern Illinois comes late. I do think they'll have a drive or 2 early where they move the ball a little bit more effectively, but I think this team showed against A&M last week. They adjust very quickly on defense and make those and are able to shut down plays. I think the experience that guys like Drake Bowen and Kingston and Jaden Alsbury and Christian Gray and Adon Schuler got last week is going to make them even more effective in this particular game. So I do think Northern Illinois will make some plays early to get some drives going. I will not be shocked if they get a first quarter score in this game, but I think Notre Dame settles in pretty quickly. The big thing for me, though, is I actually think this offense is going to have a good start, right? And that's what it comes down to for me. And I don't think Northern Illinois' offense is going to have much of a chance to really keep them in this game if they fall behind early, because that they want to be balanced. They want to run the ball, play action, movement. They don't want to sit there and drop back and throw the ball all over the field. That's not their wheelhouse. And if Notre Dame jumps on them early, then I think that puts them behind the 8 ball and makes life a little bit easier for the Notre Dame defense. And that's kind of how I see this game playing out a little bit, Ryan. So not quite the dominating margin of victory that maybe some people are thinking. I actually have them right at the spread area. You have them very close to
I have
this,
a
like
27,
a point under.
27,
right?
yeah.
So I think the spread is fair about where Notre Dame should be. Could I see Notre Dame putting even more on them? I could, because of the athleticism difference. That's really the big thing for me. If the Notre Dame offense does really get hot, I could see this one getting really ugly, because I think there's a much bigger gap in athleticism between the Notre Dame offense and the Northern Illinois defense than the other way around.
Yeah, I know we don't really talk about, sports betting on this show, obviously, and we're definitely not going to give advice. But even before, I didn't even know what the spread was, and I predicted the score prediction, and then I went and looked, and it was like 28.5. I was like, wow, I think that line is perfect. Like, I really do. I think that is a very good line, which is why the people in Vegas make money, obviously. But yes, I think that spread is perfectly right on cue, and I ended up picking them by 27, which was right in the shouting distance of the line even before. So I think it was pretty spot on.
So, Ryan, you have made a prediction of 44-17, right?
Yep. Yep.
So if the game plays out how you think it's going to play out, who gets your game balls on offense and who gets your game balls on defense?
Offense, I'm going to go a little bit off the wavelength here. It's going to be a Jaden Greathouse show, especially in the first half. I do think that maybe not the biggest, but I think one of the big advantages Notre Dame has offensively versus defensively is I think the second level defenders are not very athletic for Northern Illinois. So I think Jaden Greathouse in the slot position could create a lot of easy separation, could find some stuff down the seam a little bit. So I'm going to go Jaden Greathouse with an explosive first half that helps lead Notre Dame to victory.
It's funny you say that, Ryan, because that's one of the reasons I was contemplating going with Jeremiah Love for my player of the game, because I'm just envisioning some sort of angle route or wheel route or slide or screen, like the screen he caught last week against Texas A&M. Maybe this time it gets the corner because and their safeties are very long, smart, quality football players. They're not the most rangy, explosive guys athletically either. And so I think a perimeter game is where it's at. I'm actually going to go Chris Mitchell. I think Chris Mitchell's season is going to start almost exactly like it did last year. Not quite the numbers the same. Chris Mitchell had 1 catch for 2 yards in the opener last week, went for 9 for 201 in the second game. Now that was against Maine, who's a quality FCS team. This is a better team than that. But I just feel like that the reason I'm really going here, Ryan, is because I believe that Notre Dame is going to want to push the ball down the field a little bit more this week and get that part of their game going. And I think that Chris Mitchell is going to be the biggest beneficiary of that. And so that's kind of where I went. So, I kind of went in reverse order. So I'm sorry. My head got a little messed up. Defensive game ball for you, Ryan.
Yep. Boubacar Traore, 3 sacks in this football game. That's my guy. I think that if there's a player that I look at and say is a true edge winner, I think RJ Oben could have been in that conversation, and I would like RJ to have a good game because he was pretty quiet against Texas A&M, but I'm going to go Boubacar Traore breakout at the Viper position to create a lethal 1-2 punch with him and Jordan Botelho.
So I'm going, Ryan, my score is 41-13, as I mentioned. I kind of went through already how I see the game playing out. I do think the Notre Dame offense gets off to a faster start this week. I do think they hit some big plays, running backs, wide receivers. I would love to see the tight ends get a little bit more involved in the pass game this week. I think that would be good too. So I think that's going to put Northern behind the 8 ball. And once this Notre Dame defense is able to pin their ears back and you lose any semblance of balance, you have no chance against this Notre Dame football team. And so I actually think the offense is going to really help out the defense this week. And this is going to be a good test for Northern Illinois to play against this kind of team and help prepare them for what I think is the potential to go make a run in the MAC this year. It's going to be a very entertaining league this year, in my opinion. But I just don't think if they had the kind of athletes on defense that Toledo had in the last few years, then I think this team would be a lot more dangerous to stay in a little bit longer. I just think the lack of athleticism on defense is going to be something that's going to put them in behind the 8 ball a little bit early and allow Notre Dame to make some big plays. And I don't know that their defensive line has the kind of athleticism they need to disrupt Riley Leonard and bring him down. That's going to be a big part of it. So as long as the offensive line just kind of shows a little bit of growth compared to last week, this should be a game that gets over pretty quickly. And I say that after telling everyone how much I like this Northern Illinois team. I just think with the way Notre Dame played offense last week, Mike Denbrock and this offensive unit are going to kind of have a little something to prove. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the matchup works great for Northern Illinois. And my prediction is that Notre Dame's not going to just come out and play ground and pound against an inferior opponent. I hope that I'm not wrong on that. But that's kind of how I see the game. Playing out. So my game balls on offense, I already mentioned Chris Mitchell. And then my game ball on defense, I'm going to go with, in this particular, I'm going Drake Bowen. I think this is a Drake Bowen game, Ryan. I think this is the game with the way that they play. I mean, he's going to rack up a lot of tackles and make a lot of stops. This is a middle linebackers game. The way that they play offense, this is a middle linebacker game. I'm watching the film and I'm thinking, dude, Drake Bowen and Kingston are going to have a lot of fun facing this offense. Yes, sir. No doubt. No doubt. All right, Ryan. Well, that's going to do it. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate that. Say hi to the family for me, and then we'll see you again Saturday after the game, Ryan. You'll be part of the post-game show at Irish Breakdown. So about 5 to 10 minutes after the game, you're going to join Vince and Ryan and Sean and the newly married Trevor. So no more single guys on our post-game shows, man. It's all married folks now. So we're going to be ready to rock and roll. So I'm going to get to the national stuff here next. But want to thank Ryan for once again giving great insights and helping us preview the Notre Dame Northern Illinois game.
Take care, fellas. Thank you all.
So obviously next we are going to get to some national stuff. I'm going to be joined here by Bill Bender in a minute. But before I get going, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review on whatever platform of your choice that you're using. And as always, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.oxbreakdown.com. Bill, you ready to go? Bill Bender, my guy from Sporting News. Everybody, last week, Bill came on us. We told you he'd be back again this week, and there were some good games in the docket last week, Bill. There's some good games in the docket this week. We're going to preview 4 games. First of all, Bill, how you doing today, man?
Doing well, man. We have week 2. It sneaks up on you. It goes quick. It's a quick transition from week 1 to week 2 with plenty of stuff at Sporting News. I know Bill and I had Chris Hummer from 24/7 Sports on our podcast this week. Good stuff on the Longhorns.
CFB Nation, guys. That's where that's at. That episode got published today, and you guys also had a really good week 1 recap where you talked a lot about Notre Dame as well. Anthony Knapp was one of the freshmen that you guys discussed is also on that.
Yeah, so I think, and we'll have our prediction show tomorrow. You and I are going to hit on some of these games. We'll see. I mean, week 1 was fun. I think it told me, as I've said all week, we need more matchups between Power 4 schools and Notre Dame. And, the best games of the weekend, Notre Dame A&M, USC LSU, Florida Miami in a different way because you learned. And even Vandy Virginia Tech, I would take it all the way down to that. It's a school like Vanderbilt with Clark Lee winning 34-27, beating a Virginia Tech team that many people thought was going to be an ACC sleeper, all the way into Monday. Well, I mean, me too. I'm going to be honest. Like,
I didn't have them winning it, but I thought they were a team that was going to make some noise in that league. For sure.
If you think it feels good to be accountable, then I had Florida State winning the ACC and watching Bill O'Brien wear them out on Monday night. So, Brian, I'll let you take the wheel, man. We can go wherever you want. Week 1 was fun. Week 2, I mean, this slate of games we're going to preview, they're good. I think there's kind of regional rivalry factor to 3 of them, and then we get a top 10 game.
Well, we also have some Big 10 versus Big 12 games. It should be 3 games that we're previewing today that is Big 10 versus Big 12, but one of the teams sold out and decided to go join the SEC. So, but that's going to be a big one. I'll say this, Bill. I think that last week's game had more of the very intriguing Georgia Clemson, and Miami, Florida, and Notre Dame A&M, and LSU USC. But I think the one game we will preview is Texas and Michigan, and I think that's as big of a game as there is. I think in the text I sent, I put Texas at Colorado, so my old Big 12 mindset was still there. But there are some important games this weekend, Bill, and we're going to dive into. We're going to do Iowa State. We're going to talk Colorado, Nebraska. I think those are very important games. No, they're not 2 ranked opponents, but they're very big games for all 4 programs. Number 3, Tennessee, NC State, also big for both teams, but that's a big conference battle, and we'll talk about that one as well. And then, of course, we'll spend a lot of our time at the end talking Texas and Michigan, and that's going to be a huge game because there's a lot we don't know about both teams, and we're going to learn a lot about both teams in this game, Bill. So, and there's some other games that we could have discussed, but I really felt these are the 4 games that are going to have the biggest impact on. And it's not just on those individual teams, but these are the type of games, Bill, that can impact the perception that we have of different leagues. And in week 1, ACC had some games where they took a hit, and they had some games you're like, hey, that was a good win for the ACC, right? And then there's some games. The Big Ten had a couple good wins in the opening week, obviously with USC beating LSU. There's more of that conference bragging rights on the line, which I think matters beyond just fan talk on social media. It also factors into when you're trying to determine who are we going to take a 4th Big Ten team or a 2nd ACC team, a 4th SEC team or a 2nd or 3rd Big 12 team.
Right.
Those are where games like this can really have an impact. And so that's where what I think is also at stake this weekend.
I call them separators. LSU USC was like a subtle separator. I was texting back and forth with Bill Trocchi on Sunday night. that had playoff atmosphere about it with Nussmeier and Miller Moss, and those are the games that, like you said, matter when it could show up at the end of the year where USC's maybe 10-2 with losses to Notre Dame and Penn State or Michigan, take your pick. And then LSU sitting at there at 10-2, and maybe they beat Alabama, but they don't get in because of that USC game. And the Big Ten had a great weekend. Let's not I'm going to pump that up and be the Big Ten's official propagandist. 17-1 should be 18-0 if not for a missed field goal. So huge weekend for the conference. I don't know, how many of those games were amazing, but the USC game did open my eyes. The Penn State game opened my eyes. We were both onto that.
Yeah,
we were both got that one right. We were on to Penn State making life miserable in Morgantown, and Drew Aller playing very well, second-year starter. So, getting into this Iowa State game, this is one of those. I was going to ask you, how many plays do you watch Iowa before you turn the channel?
Good Lord.
Do you get through 5?
A series, maybe?
Yeah.
I mean, so like, let's just get into that game, Iowa State. Let's just dive into it, because I think this is a very important game for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you just look at the individual teams, obviously there's always in-state bragging rights that that you have to look into and those type of things. But I also think there's a lot more to it than this. There's a lot of people that have convinced themselves that Iowa's going to be a better team on offense this year, and if they're a better team on offense, maybe they're a team that can make some noise in the Big Ten. Whether that's getting one of the 3 or 4 at-large bids, or whether that means maybe they knock off somebody and prevent someone else from getting in. And so Iowa obviously has a lot to prove. If you didn't watch the game and you just look at the numbers, you're thinking, hey, Iowa might have an offense finally. I've got some thoughts on that we'll dive into. But, and then for Iowa State, like, Iowa State is not perceived to be as high up in the Big 12 as Iowa is in the Big 10. Mm-hmm. But I do think that there's higher expectations for Iowa State this year than in the past. They've got a quarterback coming back, some decent skill, a lot of guys coming back. Can Matt Campbell get them back on track? So there's a lot of those storylines. But also the Big 12 is fighting for respect. And because there's just this assumption that the ACC and the Big 12 are probably going to get one team in each, maybe 2, maybe one of them gets 2. And going into the season, the perception was the ACC would. It would be 2 of Florida State, Clemson, or Miami. Well, one of those teams is, yes, Florida State can still make the playoff. If they win the rest of their games, they get an at-large, they get an automatic bid. Don't see that happening right now. But the Big 12 is one of those leagues that right now people say, well, they're only going to get one team. Whoever wins the league is going to get in. Well, this is the kind of game, and other games like it. We'll have another one coming up, where if you can win some of these games, maybe you can get a second team in over a 4th Big 10 or a 4th SEC, depending on how those things go. So I think there's a lot of that at stake too, Ryan, Bill, in this game, beyond just the individual matchup of the 2 teams.
Right. And this game typically close. Last 6 games, 1-score games.
Close and ugly.
Ugly, fumble, punt here, pick, a drop. Literally, it's one of those games where one play, you hate saying, I know you're a former coach, and I've tried to be one on the youth sports level, but like you say, like every play matters. Like literally, this is one where that one play will matter. I'm curious to see, and you're a good quarterback guy, Cade McNamara, 251 yards, 3 scores last week. He's played. We know who Cade McNamara is. Right. Rocco Beck, there seems to be a little more placed on him. 267 yards, 2 TDs, NFL bloodline, all those things. I'm wondering if for Iowa State to win, I feel like he's going to need to outplay McNamara more than McNamara needs to outplay Beck.
If Cade McNamara just does for Iowa what he did for Michigan in 2021, Iowa's a dangerous football team. And that is just manage the offense, get the ball where it needs to go, make the occasional 3rd down throw, don't screw it up, right? Like, just don't suck. Like, that's literally the new standard for Iowa quarterbacks. Don't suck.
Right.
And if they do that, they got a shot to win a lot of games, Bill. What I think Iowa needs from him, or what I saw from Iowa is a lot of the same old, if I'm just being honest. And people point to the 40 points, and they scored 21 points in the 4th quarter. They were winning 6-0 at halftime. Now, that could have just been first game. You needed some time to get back into the rhythm. Cade missed a lot of games last year. You've got some new faces, new system. So it could just be, look, they needed some time to get going, and they are going to be a better team. But, the numbers were good against a decent FCS team, right? But I still have a lot of doubt. I'm in let me see, like wait and see mode with this offense. But look, Bill, the reality is they had 492 yards of offense and 6.93 yards per play. Do you know what their season high was last year?
300 maybe.
402 against Rutgers. And then they had 387 and 5.95 yards per play against Western Michigan. That was it. Yeah. And that was all rushing. They had 254 rushing yards. They actually made some plays in the pass game. So I'm very curious if it's going to be legit. And here we're going to find out this week, because this is a good Iowa State defense. But your point is absolutely spot on, Bill. I like this Iowa State defense. With all due respect, Rocco Becht is facing a much tougher defense than what Cade McNamara is facing, especially in the secondary. And just the way they run their offense, they need him to carry it more. I was run game last week, did well. Caleb Johnson averaged over 10 yards a carry. Kamari Moulton was the grinder, and they had Cade McNamara, he was efficient throwing the football, which is really all you need him to be. Iowa State, on the other hand, really struggled to run the ball last week.
Right. And
they needed Rocco Becht. Now, I will say that they also played a much better FCS team in North Dakota, who's a perennial, deep run in the college in the playoff type of team. But Iowa State's defense was pretty salty last week. But Iowa State is a team that, they had 370 some yards. I'm looking at last week. Right. They had 353 yards last week, only 86 on the ground. They almost got doubled up by, actually, they did get doubled up actually on the ground by North Dakota. That's where I kind of get a little bit nervous for Rocco Becht, because if you're asking your quarterback to go out there and carry you against Iowa with not a lot of help from your run game, it's going to be a long day for you.
Right. I think so. And I think for me, this is a Matt Campbell kind of pressure game. Remember when he was the front runner to be Michigan's coach?
Yeah.
And
there's a bunch of Notre Dame people.
Wanted
if Kelly leaves, Matt Campbell's. Yeah.
That he's been on everybody's thing. And I like Matt Campbell. He comes from Mount Union, great Division III program.
I coached against him when he was a player, by the way.
Good guy, good player, good dude to talk to. Probably could have but that tells me he's fine there. Mm-hmm. He's fine to be at Iowa State, and that's fine. Iowa State's never beat a ranked Iowa team at Iowa. Ooh. At Iowa. That's the stat that got me this week. I
did not know that.
So they've never won this. And you know how these sibling in-state rivalries work, where one has to be the little brother, in my opinion. That's probably Iowa State in this situation. I don't want to madden my Iowa follower people, but it's just true. Like the Hawkeyes, I think, and so my way of telling you, I must have had a sense of humor when I made this prediction. I put Iowa 20-12.
We're close.
Like 20-13, 20 to, and if you look at some of the past scores, 13-3, 18-17, 10-7, 20-13, we're probably there, and they'll probably play field position. And the one thing that can alter that is, like I said, I remember one year one of these teams had a fumbled punt or a pass off somebody's back that lands in somebody's hands. It's literally fluky, and it's not in Ames. So I'm going to take the Hawkeyes.
I went Iowa State by 10. I went 20-10 is my score. And if you look at my prediction, Bill, I have where the 10 is, the last number I have scratched off because I originally had 13. So we're very close on this one.
That's funny.
I'm going to give Iowa the benefit of the doubt that their slow start last week was related to Cade McNamara's time off and rustiness and learning a new system under Tim Lester.
Right.
And that what we saw in the second half is more of what's to come. I'm going to assume that. I am doing so while kicking myself while saying that. Like, dude, you're seriously banking on Iowa to get better on offense.
Right.
You said that last year, and look what happened, right? And, so I think they were just so god-awful at quarterback last year, and I just think, Cade is what he is, and that's a perfect fit for the Iowa offense, and I think this year we're actually going to start to see it. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think it's going to be a 20-10 game. I think Rocco Becht's going to make some plays early. I could see this being a game that maybe even Iowa State has a 10-7 lead at one point, and then they just Iowa figures it out. Phil Parker gets rolling, and there's just not a lot that Iowa State's going to be able to do, and they pull away late. Or I could see it being a game where it's just a slugfest where, Iowa does something early and stays away. But I think the Hawkeyes win this one.
Yeah, by 10. That's a good call, and we're on the like minds there. So I guess we move on with can you pronounce Tennessee's quarterback's last name?
Well, we're going to go Nebraska, Colorado.
Let's Nebraska, Colorado.
Colorado.
All right.
Yeah, because this is going to be. I want to that's going to be because that's a battle of ranked teams that I'm very, very curious.
All right.
Curious of
wherever you want to go.
Let's go Nebraska, Colorado. This is a battle of unranked teams, but I think it's also two teams that expectations are higher for both compared to where they were last year. More so Nebraska, I think, than Colorado from a realistic standpoint, not the national let's hype up Deion so we can then tear them down if they fail kind of thing. I do think when I look at Colorado, I see a team that's their improvements are more balanced, where Colorado's still a team with a really good skill players and not very good in the trenches. So, but this is a game that last year Colorado won and dominated and looked really good. This is the game that really created the hype machine last year, because the TCU game was big, but then when they went out and rolled Nebraska, it's kind of like, okay, Colorado's legit. Well, they weren't, but this is another opportunity for Colorado to say, hey, look, we are that good of a program. We can do those things, and this is an opportunity for Matt Rule to say, hey, we're back, we're rolling. Like we've got this thing going. And so there's a lot at stake, not only the Big 12 versus Big 10, but just for these two teams. This is big because I think the winner of this game has a shot to vault into the top 25 in the next couple weeks.
They will. I had Nebraska in our top 25 this week. I maybe for promotional purposes, sure, but I think this will be more entertaining than Michigan, Texas for entertainment value, not for maybe execution football stuff. Probably some sloppiness in between, but you're watching Shedeur, who I think could be a top 5, if not number 1 pick. That'll get picked apart later. And you're watching this Dylan Raiola, who I think is a program changer. I was very impressed with him last week. I watched quite a bit of this Nebraska game. His poise, he's given Nebraska something they haven't had in about a decade, a guy that can throw the ball down the field. Yep. He had 2 touchdowns on passes of 20 yards or more last week. And as I found this tweet, and I wish I'd give this person's credit because I literally embedded it into my story. His best throw was off the fingertips of a guy. So he could have had 3 touchdowns of 20 yards or more. Took a sack. Regardless of how you feel about how he switched high schools or decommitted and went to this school, High State, Georgia to Nebraska, he's a legacy recruit. He's given them hope. This is the best quarterback matchup of September. Am I wrong?
I'm trying to. I mean, talent-wise, I'd have to think through. It's in the conversation.
Like the next big one will be Milroe and Beck, or Ewers and Beck. But I'd rather watch this, honestly, because I think Shedeur, Bobby Carpenter, who I do his show all the time, tweeted this last week. It's almost like Deion's giving the NFL good tape of Shedeur because he's constantly under duress making plays. And he doesn't turn the ball over. And he only took 1 sack. And I don't know who this game means more for. I'm going to say Nebraska, because they've tried to announce their return on the stage for so long. This is their best primetime stage until they play Ohio State in about a month.
I'm thinking like there's so many different ways my head goes on that response, Bill. But I think at the end of the day, I believe Matt Rule's trying to build a more long-term program than Deion Sanders is. That's kind of what I think. And a game like this is, of course, going to mean more to the guy that's trying to build the more long-term success. And so but I also think that for Deion, it's more about a game like this, and then hopefully springboarding into some success in the Big 12 could be the thing that gets him because I used to think Deion was maybe in this and want to do something at Colorado, but his actions the last 6 months makes me realize once his kids are gone, I think he's gone at the first chance he has at a good job. That's just kind of where I'm at. I don't know him personally, but this is a kind of game. But that's more for him from a program standpoint. The Nebraska program needs this kind of win.
Right.
It's also an old rival, and it's a team that honestly doesn't get a lot of like nobody takes Colorado seriously anymore. they're now like an entertaining, like, okay, I know I can, if I talk about them, I'm going to get clicks, but I don't know that a lot of people necessarily respect their football program right now, right or wrong. It's more of the show.
They're the reality TV show you can't stop watching.
They're the Kardashians of college football.
Yeah, I don't watch reality TV. I'm trying to think if I have ever watched a reality TV show, but if I did, they're the show that everybody watches because maybe it's not good quality, but you leave it. I watched every play in North Dakota State.
Yeah.
Every play, because whether it was, and here's one thing in this game, Brian, that I'm wondering. I think Nebraska's going to have a lot of success running the football. They did last year. They ran for over 200 yards. So they're going to support Raiola in that way. I thought he handled the blitz well last year. He stared down. There was one play. He stared down a receiver too long, got clocked by a defensive tackle, and I didn't know if he was going to get up. But that happens with young quarterbacks. So what do they do about Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn Jr.? Can those two guys, I think they keep Colorado in the game because I'm not sure Nebraska has an answer in the back end for either one of those guys.
Well, number one, I don't know that the answer for those guys is in the back end. I think the answer for those guys is up front.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big thing for me is you've got to get him off his launch point. You've got to harass him. As he showed last week, and North Dakota State was missing, I was told they were missing their best defensive back last week. And so some of those blown coverages were due to right at where he would have been. But look, they're going to make plays. I mean, that's a reality. When teams shut Colorado down last year, it was force Shedeur to get the ball out as quickly as possible. And then that we can rally to the football. Because I'm not as high on Shedeur Sanders as a quarterback as you are. But one thing I think
why not? Like, tell me why, because I respect your opinion about quarterbacks, and I would love, and I've heard other. I feel like the two of us see the football game. I think you see the game better than I do because you're coach, and I respect that. So I kind of want to hear why. Like, what is it about? And I've heard this from others too, and I'm like, what am I missing, Brian?
Sure.
So tell me what I'm missing.
Well, number one, I'm someone who puts a lot of value in leadership and character. And I don't know how well a guy like Shedeur Sanders is going to go in a locker room as a leader. That's part of it. The other part of it is I think he's got good skill. I don't think he has elite skill. I think he's got a good arm. He doesn't have an elite arm. He's got good accuracy. He doesn't have elite accuracy. He'll put himself in some situations where maybe he thinks his arm is a little bit better than it is. And that'll get him into a little bit of trouble. And against better defenses, that's going to result in more incompletions and potentially some turnovers. I do like that he doesn't turn the ball over a ton. Right. He's pretty good at protecting the football. He's a good processor. He's not an elite processor. There's just nothing that Shedeur does, in my opinion, that's special. He does a lot of really good things. So when I say I don't like Shedeur as much as others, it's not that I think he's like, I'm not one of those people that believes in like you're either good, you're what people say, or you suck.
Right.
It's not, he's a good quarterback. He's not what, and you and I have had this, I feel about him a lot how I feel about Carson Beck.
Right.
Good college quarterback, good system, good talent around him, does some really good things, not an elite talent, in my opinion.
I felt better about Carson Beck after last week, honestly, though. I watched him against Clemson. Yeah. Second half, he was like, he's manipulating the pocket. He's settled in. He's at minimum accurate. Given me the choice between these two, I might take Shedeur. One criticism I heard from somebody was, well, it's like he's running a high school offense.
I mean, that's not his fault.
That's not on him.
No, like, look, if you're running a quote unquote high school offense, if you can read it and do what you need to do, then
do it.
You're going to do it. That's not your fault. I think I think that's just more of a let's take a shot at Colorado comment more than
but
former NFL head coach running that offense.
He throws the ball downfield well. He extends plays. I think the fact he's doing all this without the benefit of a running game has impressed me the most, because a lot of quarterbacks, if you give Shedeur Sanders in college 180 yards per game on the ground on top of what he's doing, then you can blame Dion. You can blame his dad for that. But, through Jackson State, and I had this stat this morning. Let me dig this up really quickly. He threw Jackson State and 2 years of Colorado. You're talking about a guy when I talked to Dion a couple weeks ago, he pointed out, this guy's started every game since high school. But if you take his college stats through Jackson State and Colorado, 97 touchdowns. This is Jackson State and Colorado,
Sure.
by the way. 97 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. When I see those numbers, he's doing something right.
Sure.
So, I mean,
here's a number that I look at, though. Okay, that's great. Did that at Jackson State. He averaged 7.5 yards per attempt last year. That's very average.
right.
I mean, Sam Hartman was around 9, and he wasn't that good. It comes down to this. When I think of a guy who people are going to talk about being a top 5 draft pick, I think of Jaden Daniels. I think of Drake May. I think of C.J. Stroud. I think of Caleb Williams. And this kid's just not in that conversation, in my opinion, in any physical skill set. And I don't think he has – you can make up for that if you're really sharp mentally or if you have great character, great leadership. And I just don't see that from Shedeur Sanders. I see a really good college quarterback that's not an elite college quarterback. That's really what it boils down to. And I don't think there is an elite college quarterback in college football this year either. That's the other part of it.
What's your early – did you get a chance to watch Raiola at all?
I did. Yeah, I did.
Think?
I actually was impressed because his ability to process information was one of my biggest criticisms for him in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things that I never felt like he was great throwing the ball on time. I never felt he was great, picking apart defenses mentally. And I actually was impressed by what I saw from him in the spring game. First of all, I thought he started to show some of that stuff in the spring game. And then of course against UTEP. Now, again, it was against UTEP,
right?
But, I thought his ability to kind of handle the offense, to manage the offense was better than I thought it was going to be. This game isn't about the two quarterbacks for me though. This game is about, I think one team is going to be able to run the ball and one team plays better defense in the trenches than the other. And that's really, look, if Colorado could play 7-on-7 games, they'd be a top 10, top 15 team. But unfortunately, football is not a 7-on-7 sport. And I mean, we saw it last week. I thought they just got pushed around in the trenches by North Dakota State. Nebraska is going to be a lot better there on both sides of the ball. So I think Colorado's going to have a really tough time. And when you look at when Shedeur struggled last year, I mean, even against some teams that weren't very good, Arizona State, you look at struggles against UCLA, and actually they had a pretty good defense. Arizona didn't have a very good defense. He had some struggles in that game. When you looked at it, it came down to those teams were able to get pressure on him and force him to get the ball out and get the ball out quickly. And the more you make them run plays on offense, the more you have a chance at hitting something big on Travis Hunter in the fourth quarter.
Right.
That's the other part of it.
Well, I got Nebraska 34, Colorado 26.
Are you serious?
Are we right on target? It is a 7-point spread, which I always, whenever I see the 7, I just commit one score. Hey, technically that means Nebraska would improve in a 1-score game where they're 2-19 since 2021. No way you have the same thing.
Almost 1 point off.
I can't wait to see I know we'll be disagreeing on the last one, but that's amazing, man.
Yeah,
that we have it that close. But yeah, I'm gonna go the Huskers.
Yeah, same here. Let's get to the next game, Bill. This is a game, and as far as how to pronounce his name, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Some people in the chat have tried to help out with that. So it's Nico. Let me find it here. Somebody had it in the chat. Irish Gordian.
It doesn't do me any good to read a pronunciation off like a word.
Right. He actually. So no, I don't know. I just call him Nico, and I know how to pronounce Nico.
And I think I've tried Yamaliva.
There's a couple extra syllables in it than I expected.
There's a lot of I's in there.
Yeah. Well, look, a lot of times you pronounce it like Tua's last name is actually Tungavaloa. It's not at all how his name is spelled.
Right. Right. Actually, there's only one I in this kid's last name, but I'll tell you this: he's good, and they're good, and they're starting to creep in my head a little bit, like Texas did last year, where I'm like, they're going to be around at the end of this thing.
Look, Chattanooga's a quality FCS team, but here's the deal, Bill. They didn't just beat up on an FCS team. They absolutely obliterated an FCS team who won, I think, 7 games last year. Yeah. And, honestly, the offensive part didn't really surprise me. I mean, I kind of expected their offense is going to be better, especially against a team like that where they just kind of out-athleted them. I was a big Dante Thornton fan. I thought Oregon did a poor job of using him, so I thought that was a great pickup. The Chris Brazzell kid's a talented young player. Brew McCoy's a really good sort of like a Juju Smith type of possession receiver that can do some good things for them. They got Holden Stace from Notre Dame who caught a couple balls last week. So I like this team. I mean, their offensive line is still a question mark for me because I don't care what they did against Chattanooga. but there's a lot of skill there. What impressed me was how good and how stingy their defense was last week. Again, FCS team, I get it, but you can only control what's in front of you. And I thought last week their defense was absolutely outstanding last week. And that was really the thing that says maybe this Tennessee team has got a shot to actually be something, because they can, not that they're going to be a lights out defense, but they don't need it though. That's the thing. Tennessee doesn't need a lights out defense. They just need a good defense. And if they have a good defense, they're a dangerous football team.
I can see it. I really like Josh Heupel's offense in general. When they have the right guy, they remind me of 2 years ago where they were Hendon Hooker, perfect fit. Hendon Hooker, perhaps at some point will get to play in the NFL. Sure. This kid's a 5-star kid. Nico, and he's under control. He set a record for passing yards in a half. But the most passing yards in a half by a Tennessee quarterback. He set that in his second start. There's a little regional tie to this. I mean, it is in Charlotte. I feel like we've talked about Tennessee all week to the point is like NC State, because we're holding their first half against Western Carolina. If we're pumping up Tennessee based on beating Chattanooga by 1,000 points, we're holding NC State down because sometimes against an FCS team with your new quarterback, it takes a minute to click, and it took a minute with Grayson McCall last week.
When you are this early in the season, Bill, what you're going to have is a lot of confirmation bias.
Right.
And I'm not someone who was very high on NC State coming into the season. And so when they play the way that they did, it just confirms that, hey, they are what I thought they were. And now they did better in the second half, but their defense to me is an issue. That's really what it comes down to for me. They lost a lot from their defense last year, not just losing, Peyton Wilson to the NFL, but CJ Clark transferred out. They lost some good football players. I do like their offense. I think that they can move the ball to a degree on Tennessee. I just don't think they're going to be able to stop Tennessee. And I'm a big Tony Gibson fan, but his defense usually needs and requires veteran players to run at its best.
Right.
A lot of those really like Brent Venables was that way. When Brent Venables has a veteran defense, it's usually pretty good. We saw that at Clemson. I just don't know that NC State can stay up in this game. And I don't see Grace. I'm not a huge Grayson McCall fan, to be honest with you. I feel like he's been in college football for 9 years, and if he was that good, he'd probably be in the NFL right now. But he's a smart kid. He'll get the ball out where he needs to get to. You're going to need someone that can kind of go out and make a lot of plays against it in a game like this, and I just don't think he's that kind of guy. And so I actually have Tennessee winning this one pretty convincingly. I have this as a 38-21 football game. I have it the same score as their game last week, but reversed.
Okay, how many points were we separated by in the first game? 2?
You said 20-12, right? So we were 2 points off.
One point last game.
The other one.
And we're still in the neighborhood here because I had 35-21 Tennessee. Okay. I think they tack on it. NC State will play. I mean, it's in Charlotte. I've done games at BOA, but Bank of America Stadium before when I lived down in Charlotte.
I bet you $20 there's more Tennessee people in that.
There will be.
There will be.
There will be. And that's when Tennessee – and there were ACC, SEC type games there when I lived there, and the SEC fan base would show out. So I do like – Tennessee to roll here, and I do like their appeal. As we're going to talk so much about Texas, Georgia, Alabama, and even Ole Miss to some extent, that I think Tennessee can get in the mix a little bit.
This is a game to me also, Bill, that if Tennessee can win the way that you and I have it, this is one of those games that helps the SEC recover from the national media. I thought ESPN, I'll just say it. You don't have to get into this because I know you have a different level of respect for them than I do. Yours is higher than mine is, I believe. They did their darndest to try to convince people that last weekend wasn't a really bad weekend for the SEC, because it was. They went 1-3 against ranked opponents, and they're going to ignore that. This week, these next 2 games are what they need to kind of just say, hey, that was week 1. One of our teams lost to a ranked opponent. They were unranked. You know what I mean? Like Florida was unranked. Yeah, LSU, it was a good game. A&M, Notre Dame was a good game. Crushed Clemson, right? These 2 games are big, and I think Tennessee whooping NC State, because beating NC State's not going to get them a lot of credit because they're supposed to beat NC State. I think if they beat NC State the way that you and I think they do, this is something that can help the SEC somewhat recover, because if you have another bad weekend where NC State pulls off the upset, Now the conversation is, hold on a second. Now SEC, you're hanging on to what?
Right.
Beating, your best team beating Clemson. Okay, great. Well, what's your next best win? Hey, but Vandy beat Virginia Tech because Miami just went out and spanked Florida. LSU just got beat by a Big Ten team, and now if Tennessee goes down to NC State, like, hey guys, what's going on here?
It's so crazy you said that, Brian. Like, it had just dawned on me. Like, when you said 1-3, I hadn't heard that stat all week, and I think it's because sometimes I'm not saying anything about it. I do like ESPN. I have so many friends that write for them, and so I'm not putting this. I'm putting it on my own.
You have friends that write for them. I'm talking the talking heads on the.
Oh yeah, I have so I have tremendous amount of respect for Heather and Andrea and David Hale and so many over there. Ryan McGee's a good friend. But my thought is, okay, so I was running down these teams that lost: Texas A&M, LSU, whom I'm at Florida. That's your like middle class SEC team that we trump up as a better middle class team than. Can't say that about USC anymore. Trojans came to play last weekend. That was impressive. Can't say that about Notre Dame right now. They went down to a place where they went down 1-10 at a place where we trumped that up to be the hardest place to play.
Hardest place to play in college football.
Thought Notre Dame managed that very well. Florida got embarrassed in their backyard by an in-state rival.
I got that one wrong. That's the one I got wrong last week.
I think I was on here last week.
I thought Florida was going to compete in that game.
But you know what? That forces me to reevaluate not myself so much as, I was wrong. I'll tell you that. I was wrong. But, man, I just believe in programs should be able to stand up like that at home, and they didn't. Right. Now they're going to go to DJ Lagway this week because Graham Mertz is hurt. A lot of questions about the Gators. When they start talking about wanting Lane Kiffin, there's some things wrong there. But great point about the how we treat the middle class of college football, as I would say. There are certain teams that are hammers that, yes, I know Georgia and Alabama are good and really good. But after that, you don't get to – South Carolina doesn't get to say we're really good because Jalen Milroe is awesome. That's always been one of my contentions with that conference.
And that matters. And that's been my I'm not going to get on the soapbox. I'm just going to say this. That's why I've said for a long time.
Right.
That the SEC gets way too much credit because of how good it is at the top. And there's an assumption about the rest of the league. And I've pointed this out. Go do an NFL draft study and compare first-round draft picks by conference to all pro teams by conference. And you're going to see a very different story from what the draft says compared to what conferences say. And I'll point to Notre Dame or Alabama guys in the NFL. Where they're drafted. I mean, Alex Leatherwood is already on his third team, and he's in his third year. And guy, if he played anywhere but Bama, he's not a number 17 overall draft pick. That's a different conversation for a different day. But here's the interesting point, though, Bill. You're not going to you're going to have a tougher time justifying your middle class getting over somebody else's middle class for those third and fourth spots if you keep catching L's out of conference. So it didn't affect the 4-team playoff because at the end of the day, a lot of times that second SEC team was as good as anybody else. But now when you're trying to convince people to get that third and fourth, and when you're trying to negotiate automatic bids, when you expand to 14, people that are going to be against them, but ACC presidents going to be like, hold on a second. We just kicked your behinds out of conference this past season. Second year in a row, we've had a ton of success against you out of conference. Maybe we shouldn't be giving you. So these things matter in a lot of different ways. And if the ACC and the Big Ten in the Big 12 are taking it to the SEC in these non-conference matchups, that's going to start coming into play when you start talking about those third and fourth spots in those leagues. And that's why I say games like this matter. And that's why Tennessee not only needs to win, but I think they need to win kind of convincingly because they're a team that's 10 spots higher than NC State. And the expectation is going to be you're supposed to do that to them.
Right.
And it's the same thing with A&M and Notre Dame last week. You and I both picked Notre Dame to win, but a lot of the national media it's going to be A&M because why? Oh, they're SEC, they're athletes, they're this, they're that. It's hard to play there, blah, 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 blah. So I do think Tennessee needs to win this game convincing, and I think that they will.
Right.
NC State is a team that I've just felt gets a little bit too much hype in recent seasons, and Dave Doran just is not able to take them over that hump of being anything better than an 8-5, 9-4 team. This is the kind of game that could do that, though. Let's get into the last game, Bill, because this is the big one, right?
Time.
This is save the best for last, man. This is the big game of the weekend. This is the one you'll be attending as well, I believe. Correct?
I'll be there. I'm driving.
You heading up tomorrow, or are you gonna tomorrow night?
Driving up tomorrow. I'm going to watch the Packers with Dave Briggs of the Toledo Blade, another one, good friend. And then we'll head up together in the morning. It's going to be fun, man. It's I'll let you start. Like, I'm just going to start. I'll lead off with this. I don't know when Texas got the big game reputation. Did they get that? That's what I said. They're 1-4 in top 10 games under Sark.
Okay.
But the assumption is they're going to just go up there and dominate, even though, and it's based off one game. It's based off the fact that they went to Tuscaloosa and put one on Alabama last year. And it's probably based on what we've watched with Michigan's quarterbacks, of course. But
let me take Michigan out of this conversation for a second.
Let's do Texas.
I have been saying this for a while. I like this Texas team. I am incredibly annoyed by some of the big picture hype about Texas. I think this team is legitimately good. I had somebody on a Notre Dame message board, a Notre Dame fan, tell me Notre Dame's not on tier 1 with teams like, and this was the list, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Texas.
Okay.
And Texas, like Steve, and then I see people, with all due respect to my beloved Sporting News, release these top coaches lists, and Steve Sarkisian is in the top 5 to top 10.
Where did I put him?
Based on what?
Let me see. I did that, so I gotta see where
you had him in the top 10. I think you had him close to the top 5. And my answer is based on what? He has the same record in the Big 12 as Sonny Dykes. There's one difference. Sonny Dykes has a playoff win. Steve Sarkisian does not. Sonny Dykes beat Michigan. And so why doesn't he get the same benefit of the doubt for quote-unquote big wins that Steve Sarkisian does? And so my thing is, I thought Sark did a great job last year with that team and won multiple games against good teams with his backup quarterback. He did a good job. But why is the guy that's a 10-year NFL or a 10-year Power 5 head coach who's had one 10-win season all of a sudden considered a top 5 coach? So national media can't say, well, what has Texas done? Well, you guys are the one that are putting these guys up. That you guys are the ones putting them in the top 3.
I
you
have
guys are
him
the
at
ones putting
6. I have him at 6.
Based on what? Why is he a better coach than Sonny Dykes?
I think
same record.
I got you.
Sonny Dykes has beat him just as many times as he's beat Sonny Dykes.
I think he did a quick rebuild at a place where you should be able to win at Texas, and he's won there. I'll give him that. And I think
Sonny Dykes didn't inherit a TCU team coming off of a phenomenal season.
I think they had a charmed season. Very charmed
season. They did. But how do we know that Texas didn't have the same thing? That's where I'm coming from, right? Why is he getting the benefit of the doubt? Why is Texas getting the benefit of the doubt that we don't give to other teams? Like Texas has how many playoff berths since it started? 1. How many playoff wins? 0. Right. I mean, so what's the why is now? I think offensive mind clearly top 5.
Right.
I think that by the end of the year, I'll probably be on that bandwagon with him because I actually like Sark as a coach. But I'm like, how about we have him prove something other than going on the road and beating a Bama team that struggled with South Florida the week before?
In my defense, if you look at everything after 5, we can rip everybody. Sure. We can rip Ryan Day at 2 if you want, or 3 if you want.
Where was he in your list?
3. We can rip Dabo at 2. I mean, the top 10's hard because you can even go down to Lincoln Riley, and then I always when I do those coach rankings, I always tell people it's almost like we should probably do 3 separate lists. Honestly, you should do the Group of 5 list by itself, which CBS did this year. That's smart to get them out of the way. Then you do the coaches that are coaching at quote unquote big programs, and then you do the coaches who are doing more with less type deal, right? So
because otherwise we basically who has the best record at the best perceived programs. You know what I mean? Because what's more impressive, what Kyle Whittingham has done, or what Mike Gundy's done the last 3 years at Oklahoma State, or what Steve Sarkisian's done the last 3 years at Texas.
And I'm admittedly, this is where you and I differ a little bit. I'm admittedly a guy when I do these lists where I was like, okay, I'll give more credit for the guys that win at the big programs than the guys that do more with less. I admit that.
Right.
Because I think if you go to a place where they win more with less, you're forgiven more for losing. And I think that's harder.
Right.
Like Matt
if
Campbell.
The coach actually loses.
Like we talked about Matt Campbell earlier. For years, I had a long-running my college roommate, my quarterback in high school, my best friend JD. I'm actually going to send him this podcast after I say this. For years, it was Pat Fitzgerald with me and him. He was Pat Fitzgerald's great. I was like, I'm sure he is, but they went 5-7.
Yeah.
That's where he's opposite. He likes those coaches. He sent me a picture of the old Fresno coach Pat Hill last weekend. I was like, why do I care about a Fresno State coach from 15 years ago, man?
Right.
Because he liked the guys that win more or less.
Well, like a guy like that coaches out in Utah that wins back-to-back Pac-12 championships, but keeps being ranked below Dan Lanning.
Right. And I think so. Texas, they've inherited this, and that's what I've kind of saw all week. Is like I read a prediction file. I'm not picking on somebody. They're like, Ewers is going to throw for 3 touchdowns in a blowout victory. I'm like, dude, Michigan hasn't given up 3 touchdowns in a game since like 2021.
Right.
Like if we're getting on program reputation, I think people are itching to see Michigan get their tails kicked because they want to do the whole. It was all Connor Stallions.
But can you at least understand where they're coming from on that? I mean,
kind of, but
like
people love yeah, it's the same, but it's the same people that love posting Texas's back memes when they lose. Right. So make it, that's where I get annoyed. I always got annoyed with that meme anyway, because I'm like, Texas is back. They've never left because they're always in your head.
Right.
They're like,
well, it's like Notre Dame's irrelevant. Then why do you talk about them so much?
That's what they say about Texas. If there's a program other than Notre Dame that people love to say is irrelevant, it's the 2 programs that are going to be coming out of the tunnel at Michigan Stadium on Saturday. People love saying Michigan's irrelevant. Yeah, well, they aren't. And then Texas, Texas is just irrelevant. What have they done? Well, they're coming off playoff appearance. They got a first-round quarterback, pretty good roster, and we're going to go see him play at a Big Ten stadium, which we don't get to see much.
And let's get into that matchup, because I think to a degree we're on the same page with some of this conversation. Texas, to me, still has a lot to prove. This game is a step towards that. But we're going to learn a lot about both of these teams in this matchup, right, Bill. And let's dive into the matchup. Let's first talk about this Michigan team. Obviously, there's a lot of overreaction to week 1 that always happens, and that's very true. I don't know that any team is getting a negative overreaction against them more than what Michigan did against Fresno State. And to a degree, I get it. Michigan's offense looked really bad in the opener against Fresno. The quarterback situation is one thing. I didn't think their offensive line played very well either.
They did. That was the bigger concern for me.
That's
what they should be talking about more, because regardless of how your quarterbacks looked, Michigan's accustomed to punking you up front.
Bill, they beat Penn State on the road last year with their first-round draft pick quarterback throwing a grand total of 0 passes in the second half, right? So let's not act like, Michigan only threw for 115 yards their starter, they can't win games. Guys, that's 30 yards more than they threw against Penn State last year when they beat Penn State on the road.
So if
the offensive line's the bigger concern for me.
Yes. And if we're and for those that actually watched the game, like when Fresno State cut it to a 1-score game, the Michigan offense had its best drive of the game. They started blowing. The offensive line blew them off the ball a little bit. Khalil Mullins got going. Donovan Edwards is a total mystery to me, because he will have games like he had Saturday, and then they will go play Washington or Ohio State, and he'll be the best running back on the field. I think I'd love to hear your opinion on this. I think with the quarterback situation, they should either alternate series on some level. Don't just bring in Alex Orji for 2 plays. Give him a series.
Right.
Davis Warren, that's fine. I think he was fine, all things considered. He locks in on Colston Loveland pretty bad. And I'm worried about, does Michigan have actual playmakers at receiver? And I'm not sure they do. That are going to, at least in this game, I'm not sure they test Texas on the perimeter. And that's their own fault, because like when I watch Ohio State and Notre Dame, and then I'll text buddies. I was like, how does Michigan not have at least one of these guys?
Right.
They haven't had a first-round receiver since Braylon Edwards.
Well, and they don't even have a Roman Wilson right now.
Right. That's the second-round guy.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So if you think Tyler Morris is that guy, so I don't know how much they test Texas's secondary on the perimeter. I do think they will test Texas up front, regardless of, Texas did lose 2 defensive tackles. They played well against Colorado State. They flew around. Still a Michigan offensive line at home. Still a Michigan offensive line that probably got taken a little bit by surprise by Fresno State. Fresno State was pretty physical, but you're absolutely right to be concerned because they just didn't play well.
Right. And you don't have the excuse like Notre Dame has, for example, where, hey, man, started 6 career starts. You know what I mean? And when Notre Dame takes the game over in the fourth quarter against A&M, it's going to have a lot more impact. It's going to be like, hey, look what they did. Whereas it's like, finally, it's about time. You guys figured it out. I think that's my thing. But here's what's interesting about this game is I actually am someone who has Michigan taking a big step back this year. Mm-hmm. I'm not 6-6 taking a step back, but more 8-4, 9-3. I kind of settled on 8-4 because I just don't think that their offense is going to do enough for them. They had a lot of clutch guys last year: Blake Corum, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson. This year, it's kind of like they're tied in and they're just a bunch of complementary pieces. Mm-hmm. And they don't have a quarterback that's going to be able to make the plays if Davis Warren's their starter all year. Because like if the offense was struggling last year, JJ was good to take off running and do something, and that's what they're missing that. And I think that's something that's going to hurt them, and they're going to fall victim to what Notre Dame has in the past, which is good teams are just going to say, well, we're just going to stop you from running the ball because we can outnumber you and do all these kind of things, and you don't have a quarterback that can make us pay for it the way that JJ could at times last year.
And it's like kind of what you were talking about Wimbush last week when we were talking. I think I'd almost in this game use Orji more.
Agree. I just say start him.
Yeah,
and just lean into. I mean, power reads and
he averaged 6 yards a carry last week, and so did Mullins. Yeah. Do that. Throw when you have to.
Honestly, that's what they should do. Is you just nailed it right there, and I'm glad you said that. They should be studying Notre Dame's 2017 football team and say we're going to do that.
We'll do that.
Right? I mean, Notre Dame had an offense that scored 45, 46 points over a 7-game stretch against several ranked teams, beat a 10-win top Michigan State team that year by 20, had Michigan State fans piling out in the third quarter. You've been to a lot of games there, Bill. That doesn't happen very often.
No.
Beat an 11-win USC team by 5 touchdowns, and you beat an NC State team whose all-starting defensive line was drafted in the 4th round or higher, and their middle linebacker was a 3rd-round pick that starts for the Bengals, right now. And you ran for over 100 yards against them because you had a quarterback that could really be dynamic as a runner, and you just said, hey, we're leaning into this. We're going to throw the ball down the field and run it down your throat. That's the only hope that I think Michigan has, in my opinion.
And then on the other, and let's do the fun side of this game, where I think they need 3 turnovers, 2 or 3
to win,
2 to compete, 3 to win.
They're going to need 3 turnovers, or if they only have 2, they have to lead to touchdowns, whether it's defensive touchdown or kind of like, what it has to be for them. It has to be a lot like the Notre Dame Clemson game from 2022.
Yes.
Where Notre Dame gets a blocked punt for a touchdown, an interception of Cade Klubnik where they get the ball at the 12, and then a pick 6. Notre Dame's offense threw for like 80-some yards, and like 15, 20 of that was on that late 28-14, put the game away touchdown to Michael Mayer.
They need 2 to make it. If they get 3 turnovers, I think they win. I think they could steal this one. And what I'm interested in is I don't think Texas can run the ball on them. Maybe like as a novelty, but I don't think they will. I think this Michigan defensive front is as good as advertised. We can debate that versus Notre Dame.
No.
Both interior guys.
Bill, I don't care to get into that conversation.
No, let's just stay.
They are a very good defensive line. Jayshawn Barham seems to have somewhat stabilized the linebacking core. So we're good there.
Yeah, they're going to make play, and they're going to make it really difficult for Texas to run the ball, especially early because it's going to be loud.
Because real quick, just for all the struggles they had, let's just use some context. Fresno State rushed for 9 yards on 22 carries last week.
22 carries, 9 yards. And where they hit Michigan and where I'm watching this game is middle of the field. Mikey Keene warmed up a little bit. Quinn Ewers can work the middle of the field last week. He was borderline flawless. They've got receivers that can do it. So to me, the game is, Michigan will get some pressure on Ewers, but he can flush out and make throws. What's that coverage look like against these Texas receivers? Yes. Is Will Johnson that dude? He looked This is where I'm starting to get annoyed with social media on part 1852 is like Will Johnson got beat last week on one play and all of a sudden he's trash. People on Twitter, he's trash. They don't understand that corners get beat.
Sure.
It is probably one of the most thankless jobs in football.
And it's usually games like that where they get beat.
Right. And then he sneaks a pick six where he
Rondé Gadsden beat Benjamin Morrison for a touchdown, but Marvin Harrison couldn't, right? I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
so this is where
usually goes like that.
And if you're an NFL corner like a Benjamin Morrison or a Denzel Burke or a Will Johnson in this case, this is the game where the NFL guys are watching your tape. Right. So I expect him that. And he'll be at his best, I think. I think Michigan hangs around. I do, because their defense. I think the big game factor will be there. I've been in Michigan Stadium for plenty of these huge games. I'm excited from that standpoint that I haven't seen one quite like. I've been up there for Notre Dame and Ohio State games, obviously Michigan State. I mean, this is a little bit different though, because they haven't had some. I'm trying to think of the biggest, like, I should go look this up after I get off here. Like, who was the last team Michigan had up at the Big House that wasn't Notre Dame or, I think I just figured out the answer in my head, or a Big Ten opponent. This is coming from somebody that remembers watching Florida State march in there and beat them 55-27 back in the 90s. So it'll have that kind of feel, at least on kickoff. If it's 55-27 at 4:00, we're going to have a different discussion in Ann Arbor.
Unfortunately, some recent opponents that I thought would have been great games, those teams were down. Washington in 2021 would have been if they weren't down. Yeah. But that was a bad Washington team. Like they didn't get, that was like, I think the year after Chris Peterson left or something like that. But like when you signed that game, it was expected to be a big game. But we haven't seen a lot of these games.
No, not at noon either. So like I was at the last Michigan Notre Dame game at Michigan Stadium, at least that they've played. That was a fun atmosphere. So I think the atmosphere is going to be jacked up. But in a game like this, Brian, when you know what the margin is, you kind of trust the team with the better quarterback. So I picked Texas to win the game close. So I got to go ahead.
Don't go to your prediction just yet. Cause here's the key. Here's some keys for me is Michigan's defensive line was phenomenal against the run last week against a team that only ran for 105 yards per game last year. Now Texas has I think Texas's offensive line, perhaps correct me if I'm wrong. Perhaps you're just saying that's how good you think Michigan's D-line is. I actually like this Texas offensive line. I think this is a good offensive line. It's not super, super, super talented, but it's got some talent, but they're very experienced. They've got some size. Running backs, obviously you're missing, a couple of your top running backs. I still think that they've got some talented running backs to work with. But Texas is a team that their run game is I thought they ran the ball okay in the first game. But they're not a team that needs the running game to really roll. What I'm curious to see is, will they at least be able to do enough to keep Michigan sort of in the box? Or can Michigan just kind of, hey, if your D-line, because here's the key for Michigan, if your D-line and your Mike can dominate the Texas run game, then you have more resources you can commit to some of the bad secondary matchups. And that's the biggest difference for me between this Michigan defense this year and last year, is especially with Rod Moore being out. They don't match up well in the other secondary positions opposite Will Johnson. That's my concern. And I think that was part of why because it wasn't just the one. I mean, he gave up, according to Pro Football Focus, 5 completions for 83 yards.
Right.
And I felt watching the tape, I kind of thought he was pressing a little bit, to be honest with you, because maybe he's thinking, I've got to be more of that guy. You lost your nickel from last year. You lost the UMass transfer from last year. Keon Sabb transfers to Alabama. And then Rod Moore gets hurt. And now you're seeing, Bill, in my opinion, some of the not great recruiting that Harbaugh did his last couple of years. This is where it's hurting them. Up front, they did well. This is the position where it's hurting them. But then you look at Texas, and their receivers played really well last week. They've got talented receivers, but this is a different atmosphere.
Right. You're
on the road. Jonte Cook's an incredibly talented guy. Is he going to be able to play well in this environment? It's a lot of the same stuff that people asked about Notre Dame for last week. Is Isaiah Bond going to be able to play consistently? Yeah, he did good last week, but Isaiah Bond's always done this. His whole career, He's flashed games
And
where he looked like $1 million bucks, and then games didn't do anything.
Michigan saw him last year too.
Right.
They're not going to be like, oh,
Right.
it's Isaiah Bond. Yeah.
Right.
They spent an entire
Brian
Rose
Wingo,
Bowl.
a freshman against Colorado State. Matthew Golden's a good football player from Houston. He was a nice pickup. But like the thing that concerns me about Michigan is I'm not as worried about Will Johnson because, to your point, Will Johnson's going to be locked in this game. This is the game where NFL scouts are going to be watching him.
Right.
He'll be fine. Can Michigan have answers at the other spots? That's going to be the key to this game. And the other one is, as good as their D-line was against the run last week, I didn't think they did a very good job putting pressure on the quarterback. And that's going to be a big one in this game, in my opinion, is like they had fewer pressures on Fresno's quarterback than Notre Dame had on A&M's quarterback. And so are they going to be able to get after Ewers? Because if Ewers gets comfortable in the pocket, it's going to be a long day for Michigan. Right. If he's going to have to get the ball out quickly, if he's getting pressured, if he's getting hit, that's when Quinn Ewers gets in trouble, is when his rhythm is thrown, when his timing is thrown off. When Quinn Ewers is comfortable back in the pocket, he can rip anybody up. And most good quarterbacks can do that.
Right.
He especially. But he's also especially prone to big mistakes if you get after him. So can Michigan's front get pressure on Quinn Ewers without them having to dial up blitzes? Because that's where I'm worried about this if I'm Michigan. If we have to dial up pressures to get to Quinn Ewers, we now expose our secondary to some matchups we don't like when they're lined up against someone not named Will Johnson.
Right, and I looked that up. So Ewers has played 4 top 30 defenses ever. He's played Alabama twice. He got knocked out of one of those games, which this is something to watch for right away in this game. I'm going to get to that. But Iowa State and Kansas State are the only other two. Iowa State and Kansas State aren't this defense. I would argue Alabama's not this defense. So, but what did
Especially that early in the season. Alabama was not playing well early in the season.
And what did Texas do against those 2 Alabama defenses? They went right at them. And I think Texas is going to go right at them. I think that I would say I'll make a fearless prediction. 4 plays in, they take a deep shot.
Oh,
maybe 3.
Oh,
right out of the go. Maybe second play.
Series 1 for sure.
Series 1, they are doing a Quinn, throw it as far as you can. We'll see if we hit John Tay or Wingo. 2 plays tops.
They're going to do that, and they're going to run some sort of perimeter screen within their first 5 plays.
Yes. And just
no question.
Let's test out both. And, it'll probably, I would say second play. They'll come out and try to hit it right away to see if they have it. And Steve Sarkisian is aggressive in this. Conversely, and I'm going to get to this real quick, I think Sharon Moore hasn't found his way as a play caller. Very conservative, some goofy run action. I don't think, the Penn State game, I was kind of wondering, is he scared? And here's something Michigan can't afford to do in this game. Last week, Davis Warren takes a shot deep early. They throw a pick. And then it was like, if you've watched Michigan as long as I have, it was like, oh, they're not going to let the quarterback throw down the field the rest of the game. It's like that Bo Schembechler. That's like a Bo Schembechler thing, So they've got to trust that, hey, our quarterbacks are going to make some mistakes, but we got to let them play through them. I said the same thing about DJU though, so maybe I was wrong, but that's where I'm at on that.
But that's what he did well early, right? Isn't that what Clemson did with him against BC and Notre Dame back in 2020? They just let him throw the ball down the field. I've said this: the Cade Klubnik. This is an interesting point, Bill, that we'll get into it another time perhaps. Cade Klubnik and DJ Uiagalelei's best games were both as true freshmen.
Right.
The longer they're in that system, the worse they get. And that's not a coincidence. But that's a different conversation for a different day. Here's the interesting part about this. I mentioned earlier about Michigan's going to have to be able to get pressure on Quinn Ewers and do so without having to heat Texas up. Because you'll get to him sometimes, but there's going to be 2 or 3 times where he gets a ball out and you get beat. As Texas didn't get any pressure on the quarterback last week either against Colorado State. They only had 7 pressures in the entire game. So that's going to be another thing is another reason why I think they should just lean into Alex Orji. Because what Michigan's going to have to do to have any shot to win this game, Bill, is go on long, sustained drives where you are big, you're physical, You've got Khalil Mullins in there because Donovan Edwards to me is a change of pace back.
Right.
And when he's hot, you ride him. When he's not hot, you let him get the ball 8 times and make some big plays. He was always best as a complementary piece to Blake Corum, in my opinion.
Right.
And whenever he's had to be the guy, so hopefully for them, Khalil Mullins' breakout is there, and then Donovan can kind of be that complementary slasher, big play guy.
Right.
You can hammer Texas between the tackles with Mullins and Alex Orji. You've got a quarterback that can get to the perimeter with his speed, and then hopefully that can then get Texas to have to bring some of their safeties down, and then maybe you can get a shot down the field to your tight end, one of your receivers, because like that's a big concern for me is who's their Cornelius Johnson this year, right? Because isn't that kind of what they're Michigan in the big games would do 2 things to break a game open and to win a game. First, they would find ways to get Colston Level in the football in the throwing game. The second thing they would do is they'd hit some deep play action shot to Cornelius Johnson. That broke open the Ohio State game 2 years ago.
Right.
And I don't know who that got. Tyler Morris is not that guy. Morgan is not that guy. They're the shifty, short, get the ball in space kind of guys, good route runner type of guys. Not having that to me it could potentially be Michigan's undoing. And not being able to develop some of those guys that they brought in recent years,
right.
like the Clemens kid from Oregon that they weren't able to kind of get going. I think he transferred out this past offseason. That's my concern. But if Texas is going to have a shot to win this game, they need to play Orji. They need to keep him in the game. They need to let that offense just use the misdirections, use the shifts, use some of those things to try to gash Texas and then create some big play opportunities with your back and your quarterback. Right. And then maybe catch a couple shots down the field. But if you try to play a traditional offense with Davis Warren at quarterback, you're going to get steamrolled, in my opinion, because you're just not going to move the ball that way. And that would be my biggest concern if I was Michigan. Because I think their defense, unless they give up a couple big plays early, I think their defense can keep this in the game for a half. But once Texas comes out of the break, they're going to have found some holes to hit some big plays. You're not going to shut this offense down. I mean, Washington couldn't do it for 4 quarters last year. Bama couldn't do it. They have a little bit different personnel this year. They have some guys that are a little bit more get him in space than maybe last year was just all vertical. Right. So it's going to be a fascinating game in pressure the quarterback, control the clock with the run game. That's really what this game is going to be about. If Michigan do that, they're going to win. If they try to start if they try to go with the same plan they did last week, Bill, it's not going to be close, in my opinion.
No, they'll get beat. I have Texas 27, Michigan 24. I think there's some drama to it. I just past experiences. I know we're 30 years removed from Cordell throwing the Hail Mary there. Games like this with Michigan tend to lead themselves with something dramatic happening. I could see Michigan leading at halftime. I could see them leaning on that. One weapon, the kicker, 2 50-yarders last week. I think defense shows up early. But again, like to me, the separator's quarterbacks. When one team has that big of an advantage at quarterback, big game, like top 10 game like this, it's hard to take. You mentioned like that Notre Dame path to victory that they had against Clemson. It would take something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Goofy things happen, road game. And like I said, Texas isn't this big game. I'm like, dude, I was telling Bill Trocchi this week, I was like, dude, you know how many top 5 Ohio State teams I've seen roll through Michigan? Like, that's not that.
Well, it goes back to what you said earlier. It's the Bama game.
Yeah.
People will ignore the fact that after they beat Bama, they lost to Oklahoma on a neutral field.
Right.
They struggled to beat Houston on the road. They struggled to beat TCU on the road. They didn't play great on the road against Iowa State. This is not a Texas team that has necessarily lit the world on fire away from home. 2 years ago, same deal. Lost at Texas Tech, lost at Oklahoma State, barely beat Kansas State on the road. Did have a good win over Kansas, but that was after Jalen Daniels was out.
All right.
So but it goes back to it just, hear no evil, see no evil with those other games because I'm just focused on they went into Tuscaloosa and beat Bama.
Well, one Bama.
Like,
and
that's
right.
That's what, that counts as 7 road wins right there. So
whereas Michigan beats Ohio State 3 times in a row, takes care of their business in just every big game. But that was Connor Stallions. That was Connor Stallions. That's all Connor Stallions apparently. So I got Texas 27, Michigan 24.
You're not going to be happy with me, Bill. I think there's one thing you and I we agree on. I do think the defense keeps them in that game early. I have it 30-13. I think it's going to be a game where it's Again, the big caveat is if Texas can hit a couple big plays early, I think they blow Michigan out. I just don't know that they're going to be able to do that.
Right.
I think this is going to be more of a game where it's sort of a field position game early. Texas is going to put a drive together early. I think Michigan counters with maybe a field goal drive. It's going to be like a 10-6, 10-3 game at halftime, at 13-6, something like that. And then Texas is going to be able to go in at halftime. Wear on them a little bit. And they're just going to hit a couple big plays in the second half. And then once Michigan falls behind, they're done. And that was the weakness for Notre Dame in 2017. When Miami jumped on them early and Notre Dame had to go away from running the football, it just got worse and worse and worse and worse because that's just not who Notre Dame was.
Right.
And so I see this game being similar to that. I have Texas winning 30-13. I do think it'll be a competitive game for a while because when you're that good in the front seven, it's going to keep you in some games. And when you have an elite corner like a Will Johnson, at least gives you some early options. I just think Texas has too many good – they don't have the elite level top weapons, in my opinion, that they had last year, a receiver. They've just got more of them this year. Right. That's what makes them kind of dangerous, to be completely honest with you.
And this will be the first of several for Michigan where we almost have this conversation because they'll have USC coming in there in 2 weeks, and they have Oregon coming in about a month. So it may allow them to reset and reassess what they really want to be offensively, depending on if the worst, I wouldn't say the worst thing, but if they ride the same formula they did last week and somehow squeak out a victory, it might actually work to their detriment later in the season.
Because what you're thinking, like we could just keep doing what we're doing.
We're good. We're good, and then they could get slapped.
I said this in response to a lot of LSU fans, like we shouldn't schedule tougher games. And my whole point is, losing to USC in that way is the best thing to happen to your football team. Because if you would have played Nicholls State in week 1 and then, somebody terrible in week 2, you'd still be the same team that had those same problems. You're just not going to get exposed until you play Ole Miss in conference in a month, right? You find those weaknesses out early on, out of conference, and now you have time to fix them. Hopefully, Michigan, it's going to be a quick turnaround because you got USC coming to town in a couple of weeks, but at least you get, okay, we can't do this. Like you said, if they play Davis Warren and squeak out a 17-13 victory, that's great. They worked against Texas. That's not going to work against USC and Oregon and Ohio. I mean, eventually
somebody's going to catch them. Or it could catch it. The worst time is if it happens, like if they go to Washington and lose. Or like Sparty,
Illinois.
Illinois is a circle the date game. That's a tricky one for them.
That's one of my potential trap games for Michigan this year.
It is a huge trap game because it's like the Red Grange game.
And Illinois is not afraid of Michigan because they've battled them recently.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be a tricky game for them. So yeah, but and what that does for the playoff picture, that is an SEC separator. They have the big marquee one. Leads into week 3 when they have Alabama, Wisconsin, which is not necessarily a fair one, but
it'll be hyped up as one.
They'll make it one.
Yes, 100%, Bill. They're gonna treat that with, hey, this is a vintage Wisconsin team, and boy, they're a really good team, and this is one of the quote unquote best of the Big Ten against one of the they're absolutely going to spin it that way. There's no question about it. This is a very mediocre Wisconsin football team. For sure. Very mediocre Wisconsin football team. But that was a good win over Western Michigan, and they beat South Dakota. And this is
right.
Yeah, they're bad.
That's coming.
Bad. Yeah. Oh, it's definitely coming. That's why I think some of these other games are huge. That's why that Iowa State game is big. That's why Nebraska beating Colorado. All those things kind of compile up. But the thing that Michigan, looking at it from a Big Ten standpoint, you just have to hope that if Texas wins, that it's competitive.
Right.
You can't get rolled because then it's for the Big Ten. It's not just about Michigan now. It's about the league, your quote unquote best team. And the only hope you'd have then is for Michigan to fall apart. Like if you're just not looking at this from the Michigan standpoint, just the Big Ten standpoint, Bill, you're going to need Michigan to lose 4 or 5 games in the conference. So, well, yeah, of course you beat Michigan. So did the rest of our league.
Right.
But if Michigan loses to Texas and it's like my score, and then Michigan rebounds and figures it out and goes on a run and competes for the Big Ten again, it's going to be considered, that's one, and that's where you start that third team versus your third team, your fourth team versus their fourth team for those playoff berths. That's when that stuff starts kind of factoring in. So at the very least, Michigan has to keep this game competitive. If they're not going to win, it has to at least be competitive. Because then you could say, look, you got this Texas team that went to the playoff. They got everybody coming back. We've overhauled our entire roster, entire coaching staff, and we still took you down to the wire for 60 minutes.
Right.
That's going to be an important part of it. So you have 27-24 Texas. I have 30-13 Texas. So that was the only game where we were really off in those four, Bill. Any other storylines for this weekend that are catching your eye before we wrap this up?
Not really. I mean,
not a ton of great games after.
No, and it's just the week 1, week 2 turnaround. I do think DJ Lagway starting at Florida. We mentioned them getting punked. I think we covered it there. And can he be a guy is he the guy that saves Billy Napier from the hot seat? Top 25 wise, not a lot on the bone either. And the bad news is they're really not on the bone. It's even worse next week, getting into some early. Well, I hate doing that, though. I had a boss once tell me, you don't ever want to sell it as, man, there's nothing on there, because then you'll convince people not to watch it. But I don't know. I think we'll see how some teams go to week 2. Oregon, Boise State could be a lot of fun in the evening as you wrap up the day. Ashton Gianti was amazing. Dylan Gabriel didn't look – Oregon looked like they're missing pieces. Their running game isn't great. And then
real quick on that game, worst thing to happen to Boise State was Oregon
looking bad.
Yeah. Because now you're getting a locked in, kind of ticked off version of Oregon.
And that could go either way, obviously. And then we go from there. So I think week 2 will be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to the trip to Ann Arbor. You got NFL on Sunday as well, tonight even. So excited about that. But yeah, I don't think there'll be any major surprises outside of what we already talked about.
My only other storyline, and it's a somewhat middle of the road storyline. We already talked about Tennessee, NC State, right? Outside of that, this is an important weekend for the ACC, because everybody's ignoring the good wins that you had and the good games you've had, and they're focusing on Virginia Tech losing, and they're not talking about North Carolina going on the road and beating a Big Ten team, right? It's well, yeah, but look at Vandy, the Virginia Tech. But you got SMU hosting BYU, Friday night game. You've got Duke going at Northwestern, so ACC Big Ten there. You've got Pitt playing at Cincinnati, so ACC versus Big 12. You've got Cal playing at Auburn, so ACC versus SEC. And then Virginia Tech has to have a bounce-back game against Marshall. So this is a very interesting weekend for the ACC. There's some potential for the ACC to make some noise if they can pull off a couple upsets this weekend and have a good weekend. And if they have a bad weekend, that's going to make it very hard for the ACC to get a second team in, unless you've got two, like let's say Miami's 12-0, Clemson's 11-1, and Clemson knocks off Miami, or what I mean, something like that's going to have to happen to get a second team in. So they're gonna that's going to be very interesting how the ACC handles this weekend. Outside of that, there's not a lot of intriguing storylines. I think next week is when things are going to ramp up a little bit more.
And I think we'll get into Wisconsin, Alabama, and those kind of things next week.
There's a Friday night game next week that I'm looking forward to. Also, Bill, Arizona, Kansas State. Yeah,
and we're trying. We're keeping an eye on Tatroa McMillan, who, if you haven't watched him, best receiver in the country.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
He's 6'5", runs
18 for 300 yards last week.
Anytime you have
like that.
Well, it's funny, as you know. I looked, I was like, okay, is he even in the neighborhood? I know Troy Edwards' record, 405 yards, single game receiving yards record. It's like, wonder what 304 or 303 gets in there. He's like 21st. Yeah. So many guys have thrown out 303 bills on a college football
I remember that Edwards game when he was at Louisiana Tech. I don't remember watching. I remember watching the highlights on sports.
He had like 28 catches.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
So
wasn't Tim Rattay his quarterback?
Yeah, Tim Rattay just feeding him, so
feasting. Yeah.
Troy Edwards, he may put that on watch this weekend. So that's another one. I mean, he could be that one of those guys that has like 700 receiving yards in 2 weeks, and you're going to be like, why didn't we get him? So when people say like Travis Hunter or Jeremiah Smith, no, the best receiver right now in the country is the guy in Tucson.
Yes. It's going to be one of the games we talk about next week, Bill. Right. So we'll have a lot to talk about. Thanks for joining us today. As we've told you all, this is going to be
we'll block off an hour.
A weekly feature all the rest of the year. I actually think us going at 118, Bill, was actually for us was pretty good.
Yeah, like block off an hour and get into that. And I do appreciate all the opportunities here at Irish Breakdown and other listeners. I know a couple loyal ones are in school with Grant, so we got a big football game this weekend. He was team captain, voted.
Nice.
He's one
Congrats
of the team captains.
to your guy.
So
there you go. He's a football and a lacrosse guy, right? He does
yeah.
both.
So
Yeah.
Grant will have we have big test with St. Bridget this week, and they're pretty good, by the way. So it'll be fun to see. But nothing but happy. I enjoy this hour. I almost look at this as when I get off with you, it's like, all right, week 2's here. I've done all I need. I've done all the prep I need to do, and we'll get to it.
Save the best for last. Well, if you guys want to hear more from Bill, not only this show, but we've got 2 of the episodes they recorded on CFB Nation podcast. So go subscribe to CFB Nation. You guys did your week 2 preview is going to come out tomorrow morning, but you guys did a sort of a recap of week 1, winners and losers. There was some Brian Kelly talk in there, which you guys always know I love. You had some Notre Dame talk in there. Standout freshman Anthony Knapp was in that conversation. Then you also previewed Texas and Michigan. So if you want to get, not just Bill's thoughts, but also Chris Hummer from 247 Sports joined you guys, and you guys talked about that matchup. So you can get even more from Bill on that matchup. And then, of course, tomorrow, you guys recorded today the preview for the rest of your previews for week 2, correct? So you'll get more from Bill on that. That'll be up tomorrow at the CFB Nation podcast. So if you guys are Irish Breakdown listeners, you definitely want to check out the CFB Nation podcast feed as well, because we're going to get that. And I did bring up the winners, the week 1 review. I did pull over to the Irish Breakdown channel because there was some Notre Dame talk. So you guys will get a chance to listen to that today. But you guys get that every week from the Bills, man. Bill Trotri, Bill Bender. We appreciate the work you guys do for that, and doing a little bit more this year than you guys did last year, which we're always happy about.
It is good. And I'll leave you on this one, Brian. I'm going to finish my last article of the week before everything starts. And did not know this. I'm writing about Derek Jeter being the honorary captain and all the, the fun fact that he attended Michigan technically, took some classes in the fall. I did not realize that he chose Michigan over Notre Dame and that his mother, Dorothy, was a huge Notre Dame fan.
I did not know that either.
So that was a fun little factoid along the way, that it broke his mother's heart. That's a story that you could tell your kid, guys could tell your kids down the line, is that, hey, Derek Jeter broke his mother's heart when he picked Michigan over Notre Dame.
He never played on their baseball team.
Never played on their baseball team.
So it's still true that the best shortstop to ever play at Michigan is still Barry Larkin. Oh,
one Barry Larkin with Chris Sabo there as well on those 90 Reds. I knew that one. And so very, very, that's one way to get your kids to choose Notre Dame over Michigan for all your listeners out there. But say Derek Jeter's mom wanted him to go there. But
that's right.
It's another fun story. And, McGonaghy will be on the sideline. I'm going to try to get down there and do one of those shameless, get close to him while the camera's on. But
my wife did that a little bit with Vince Vaughn last year at the Ohio State game.
I don't blame her, right? So
she does my photography. So when he walked by, she's taking pictures of him. She's like, well, I wasn't in it, but I took the picture of him. So I was like,
I'm going to share. My buddies are funny about that. They'll be like, you were in that camera close. So if I see McConaughey and you see me on the camera, you know what I'm doing it on purpose. Yeah. But
I asked her if she got a picture of Shane Gillis. She says, who's Shane Gillis? I was a little disappointed in her.
Oh,
it's like, I didn't know who he was until recently, but I'm like, he's a Notre Dame fan. You got to support him. Is he funny? I'm not sure. I don't listen to him a whole lot, but he's a Notre Dame fan, so we got to give him love.
He has moments. He's funny, I think. Yeah. So, but
his Trump stuff is really funny though. He actually does a really good Trump voice. Spot on. It's hilarious.
But it'll be a good weekend, and I definitely appreciate all you guys do. So I'm going to get to it.
Safe travels, Bill. Enjoy the game, and we'll certainly be back next week. We may talk a little bit about this Texas-Michigan game before we kick off our previews for next week. Maybe we'll see how it goes. So anyway, for Bill Bender, I'm Brian Driscoll. Ryan Roberts was with us earlier. Y'all, thanks so much for being with us today. Sign up, subscribe to CFB Nation. Of course, you need to make sure you're subscribed to Irish Breakdown. And if you have not done so, join our message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. IB Nation Sports Talk tonight at 5. We'll be back for mailbag tomorrow at 1. Bill, I will see you next week, my friend.
Hey, no problem, Brian. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.